Hello, 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 hello. Okay, cool. I can check. I can see that we are live now, and let me do some admin. Hello, everyone. This is Defense Politics Asia, and welcome back to the open mic. I have been lazy. It's been a month, I guess, since the last open mic. So it's been a very, very long time. And if you are seeing me looking at this way, it's because this where my YouTube studios are opened. So a bit confusing. So um, so I'm gonna drop the link to join this thingy in the DPA IRL channel. So for those that are on the DPA main channel chat, if you have not subscribed to DPA IRL, the link I have dropped it. I'm gonna pin it on the DPA main channel's chat. So go over to the IRL channel to watch or no to find the link to the open mic invitation code. So to join the DPA open mic, invite link is this, and then I gotta piak in and in this. Okay, so it's on the DPA IRL channel. So the the link to join the open mic is now in the DPA IRL channel, and for those that are on the main channel, which I can see is around 93 of you guys, do subscribe to DPA IRL if you have not. There is only 11 over at the DPA IRL channel site. So no hi all. So I to say hi to everybody that is currently here. So hi Crazy Market Maker. Hi EmLill Things. Hi Texture Fiber 93. Hi Seymour Edmund. Tidon Wuraj. And hi Football Fruity Bafu. Hi When Pop No Stop. Sleazer Mayhem Indie. And yeah, sorry for Indie, the DPA chat, I kind of like accidentally bash him up, because he said that I have a tummy, and then I slapped him to just wake him up. So now he's in hospital. So I standing in for DPA chat. So hi, I can't read the word. I think it's okay. I'm gonna give up. Not gonna read the word. Hi Freezy. Hi Bear Pig. Hi Alexa. I think is it Alexander or something. A lot of the Russian the words I can't read. Hi, ML Hi, Jerry. Hi, Maxine. Hi, Dosla. Hi, Midwest Docker. Hi, No Name. So, those that are interested to join the TPAIRL channel, join the open mic, do come and chit chat, to discuss, share your opinion. The link is actually in the DPAIRL channel. If you're on the DPA main channel, the link to the DPA IRL channel is in the pin message. And for those that have not subscribed to DPA IRL, please go and subscribe. Also, click the link and subscribe. Hi, Candide Schmidles. Hi, Dr. Saad. Hi, Jim Philippe Mattel. Hi, D. James. Hi, Raman. Say long live Saddam. Hi, Red Eye. Hi, Sleazer. Have you read the entire translated interview of the founder of Riba? Hey, actually, no, not yet. I haven't seen that yet. Hey, nobody want to join the open mic? Oh my freaking god! Hi, Amin, Adicia. Hi, Heinz Guderian. Hi, Everready. Hi, Toby Stewart. And so is the volume okay? Can you all guys hear me well? Or am I talking to myself? And also, for those that are on the DPA IRL channel, can you see the pin message, the invite? Just wondering, if things are working correctly. So, a bit, a bit not so sure. Can you hear me? Yeah, volume is good. Awesome. So nobody want to chat. I'm gonna talk to myself, man. You're gonna like just 2 hours of me monologuing with you guys. Hello, Franken. Hello, Peter Jensen. Hello, Bob Flatman. Hello, Raman. I think I hello you already. Hi, Vishwajit. So, why you guys are watching, I don't understand. There's a World Cup going on. But of course, who cares about Canada and Croatia, right? So, hi, Toby. How does one chat? No, the link is in the DPA IRL channel. So if you're in the main channel, the main Defense Politics Asia channel, look at the pin message. There is a link to the youtube.com/DPA IRL. Click it. You will go to the other channel, which will then lead you to the other channel where the pin message in that channel will have the link to join. And we have Manny.
Yo, yo,
Hey, long time no
yo,
see.
what's up? How you doing?
So I forgot to put my earphone. I just remembered. Give me.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, if not,
I
we're gonna
feel
have a
like
lot
you
of
should just
echo.
wait till people come in. Actually, not gonna lie, right?
Wait, I can't hear you. Give me a minute. I need to uh, disconnect and then finish. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah.
Dun, dun.
Can you hear?
All right. Yeah, awesome. I can hear
Oh
you
yeah.
now.
What's up? You haven't done the IRL stream for like almost 3 months. Actually, not gonna lie.
No, no, not true. It's only 1 month.
1 month. Oh yeah. My bad. Oh
Yeah.
yeah. So basically, I wanted to ask you a question. Like for like the last 2 months, I'm like kind of
Mm-hmm.
like, to be honest, it hasn't really been too well for, like, I guess, Russia. Honestly, before the last wait,
Your
what
head,
happened?
your head is too low.
My head. Oh yeah, my bad.
Yeah,
Oh yeah.
yeah.
So
Everybody is like
basically,
missing your face, and there's no one in the backstage. No one. You need to on your webcam. No webcam. I will let you in. So yes. All right, he's on. Ta-da.
all
Hi.
right.
Yeah, Manny, you were saying?
Oh yeah, so basically I was trying to say that like for the last 3 months it hasn't really been too well for Russia, and I'm not sure. Do you think for example, do you think Russia should wait till spring, because honestly winter is very harsh in Ukraine, so if they were to do an
Um,
offensive it wouldn't really go too well, right?
so it really depends, but because there's a theory that because of winter the ground will be harder, which means that they can actually do better maneuver warfare. The tanks can roll anywhere they want, because during the muddy season which just ended, all the vehicles are stuck to the road, which makes the Ukrainian offensive very not effective. So there is report saying that the vehicles, the moment, especially those Western European vehicles, the moment they go off road, they flip over or they get stuck in the mud, because they just not adapt. The vehicles are not adapted to the mud. In fact, even Russian vehicles can't really go into the mud very well. So uh, so that's why everybody's talking about winter offensive, and and yeah, this spring is also very cold, so no, the ground will still be hard. So which is when we seen the late spring, we seen the Russian invasion. So Toby is in. Hi, Toby. Yes.
So yeah, so that's one of the main reasons too, and also the mobilization. For me, I thought it would take like just 1 month, but it's taking more than 1 month from what I
Yeah.
heard. So what
So
does that
the
mean? Are they like
mobilization.
training one of the airborne troops, or airborne troops in like just infantry, basic infantry or something like that? I'm not sure.
So the mobilization is very interesting, because when we first heard about mobilization, they said that the training will be 2 weeks to 3 weeks, right? Around, I think
Yeah.
it's 2 3 weeks. Then it turned out that the training started to get longer and longer. So many of the troops are still now training. Like half of the troops, I think, is still training, which is very interesting. Which means that there's something that changed along the way. Like I know that there are troops that was just mobilized immediately. They were sent to the front without training, because they are desperately lacking troops, because the Ukrainians were pushing, and then there was not enough troops on the ground. So some of them got pushed all the way to the front, um, but the rest of the troops are getting more and more training. I think the it feels to me that the Russian leadership start to recognize the reality of war, and then they felt that the whatever the troops they have now, even in the mobilized troops, they are not adequately prepared for war, which is why they're giving them additional trainings, and also they do needing to learn a lot of additional new things that never existed before in the past, like the drones. There's one big thing, how to deal with drones, So I think that there's a lot of changes to how warfare is fought over this Ukraine war, which is why I think they needed more training. So especially like the winter offensive might also be a reason. So you see, it's like since we're going to launch an offensive only in winter, we might as well train our troops more. That could also be the possibility. But interestingly, also on the Ukrainian side, they also talking about a winter offensive. So I have no idea who is going to be the one getting offended over the winter.
Oh,
Yeah,
oh yeah.
Patrick, that is on the backstage. Do on your webcam, or I will let you in.
All
Yeah,
right. So and go ahead,
Toby,
Toby.
go ahead.
I have a question for you, Wyatt. Like, how do you see the war aims of the two sides? Because a lot of people, they look at the situation, perhaps even myself, and they think this is a game of risk, or this is a game of civilization, where the idea is to take a bunch of territory and then you say, "Oh, I win." But more realistically, Russia, do they play the long game? Do they just have a perpetual war in Ukraine because that achieves their aim of Ukraine not joining NATO in the same way as Georgia can't join NATO because it's involved in a conflict? So I don't see that Russia is necessarily in a hurry to get anything done. They can take their time, and so their priorities may well be getting their population on side, however long that takes. It could be that they are training, so-called training. It could be that they are just waiting until they have their propaganda machine and they have their population on side because they're not in a hurry. That their war aims, it seemed to me, is not necessarily to quickly conquer Ukraine by Christmas. They just don't want Ukraine in NATO. And maybe, if we're cynical, they want to sell a lot of weapons and the military industrial complex wants to make its money. And arguably, this is also on the other side as well. What are the Ukrainian war aims? Do they really think that they're going to crush Russia and get Moscow's going to surrender and whatever? Or are the war aims of the people who are controlling the war to sell a lot of weapons? And so who cares how long that takes? It just seems to me that unless we understand what the war aims of the two parties are, we can't really make sense of their strategy. And I am cynical enough to think that this is just a massive exercise in the consumption of military materials. It doesn't seem like Ukraine can defeat Russia, and it doesn't seem like Russia is all that keen on defeating Ukraine.
Any
I
opinions?
wonder. I wonder what do you think? What do you guys think? Like, what are the war aims here? Like, what do the two sides want here?
To be honest, I thought I knew what their war aims 3 months ago, but like right now, I'm kind of unsure, because of what happened. To be honest,
Yeah, tell
but
me about it, man.
to be honest,
From the beginning of the war, my thinking just keep changing because
it kept on
the
changing
Russia is just
because
not predictable, right? What the
yeah,
Russians
the
is
war is
doing.
unpredictable.
The Belarusian president actually admitted, right, Putin has failed in the Ukraine war, right? There was a interview between Belarus president by some media, and he lately told like Vladimir Putin has failed in Ukraine. He officially told like that, and he said there will be a no nuclear war between Ukraine and Russia.
I've never
So
seen that.
I think that actually the Russian society and Belarusian society is actually accepting the fact that the NATO is actually winning in Ukraine, I guess. So maybe they will withdraw, like what happened in Kherson, right? In Kherson, they gave citizenship to Ukrainians, and what happened next? They withdrew. So there is a possibility I see that sometime after the Zaporozhye will fall, then Russians will fall back to Crimea, I guess.
I mean that just you're probably right about that, but to be honest, like if they withdraw completely from Ukraine now, like not including Crimea, it's just not going to be. good for the public because
No, no, I'm not talking about. They will not move from Crimea. Crimea, they want Black Sea Fleet, right? They will not
yeah,
withdraw from Crimea, but they will. I think they will withdraw from north of Luhansk, and they will definitely retreat from Zaporozhye, I guess, because they cannot maintain. Actually, the Russian army currently is in a deplorable situation, right? They cannot. Their morality is less. Their troops are running out of, I guess, essential materials. Ukrainian videos coming out of TikTok and YouTube, they have Western weapons. Their morality is high. Even though they are taking very high casualties, they have a spirit like Soviet soldiers in Second World War. So I accept. So Russians are unlike Russians. Russians are like, there are lots of videos that Russians are retreating. They are scared of Ukraine. Maybe it's propaganda, maybe I am wrong, but I don't the as we see, the probability of Ukraine winning is getting more and more, and Russia losing is getting higher and higher. Maybe after some new tricks, or maybe the mobilized troops will come, the factor may change, but from present stand of view, I guess the Ukraine will win, unless Russia takes a very hard step with something. Some change should be taken. Sorry for my
right.
English. I am not a native speaker.
Yeah, no, don't worry about it. I mean, I understand what you're trying to say because like for the last 3 months, I mean, it's just been terrible right now. So if Russia puts their foot down and
Well, it
takes this
hasn't been
pretty
all
seriously,
bad. Like, people are making a lot of money out of this.
yeah, you're right about the defense industry in the United States are just basically getting a lot of whole lot
Oh
of
no, I'm
profit.
talking about the Russian military industrial complex. Russia is not a communist country. The second biggest shareholder of Gazprom is the New York Mellon Bank that was founded by Andrew Mellon. And nobody made more money out of the First World War than Andrew Mellon. So when Russia is expending ammunition in Ukraine, there are heaps of Americans making money out of that, heaps of Brits too, just quietly. War is a fantastic business. And right now, you got Slavs killing Slavs. Who really gives a damn?
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, we're all thoroughly entertained, right? Because we're entertainment fundamentalists in the West. As long as we're entertained, we're happy. And it's entertaining because it's not our people, right?
yeah. In some extent, yeah. Oh yeah, I got one question for you, Wyatt. So I kind of find it a little interesting. You know how the Kharkiv offensive, you know how they pushed through and basically took all of the oblast for Kharkiv. I thought that the Ukraine was going to keep on going to northern Luhansk since they lost Izium and Kupiansk, but that didn't really happen. And
Mhm.
do you know why that didn't happen? Because I thought they would keep on going through
Um,
northern Luhansk and keep on, but
so
that didn't really
so
happen.
when the Russians withdraw because they do not have enough troops, for whatever reason, there are a few reasons. One of the biggest reason was that the troops that was originally fighting in Ukraine, uh, they are contract troops. So their contract is over. So
Mm.
everyone was withdrawn. So there was actually no troops to put it into Ukraine, which is why all the front line was actually held by the militias and the Wagner groups and probably some other professional soldiers that was still in Ukraine, but they do not have enough numbers. So what happened was that they cannot hold the line, so they withdraw to behind of Skill River, and then they actually hold only the few choke points with the minimum number of troops to hold as much as they can. So while that was happening, mobilization was announced, and then reinforcements were being sent in, but it was very limited. So they got pushed out of Liman, and then it was only until when they reached the Kremlin Svatove that line, that's when all the mobilized troops start to get sent into the front, which is what I mentioned about those troops that were sent to the front without training. So
So basically, I heard that people like the Russians were putting some conscripts to hold the line in Luhansk since they officially stated that Luhansk the next in Zaporizhia and Kherson was Russia. So the conscripts could be moved in to defend the line, from what I heard, but I'm not sure.
I mean, on
The
paper,
po- the,
but they wouldn't do that yet.
They wouldn't do that yet. Oh, all right.
They made a
because
policy statement they
is
wouldn't do
expensive.
that.
Yeah. So they say that Putin put it very clearly that no conscripts will be sent to the special military operation. So they have not declared this as a war yet, which is why this conscript cannot be used. This is still pretty much the special military operation. So hi, how to pronounce your name? Alex? Yeah, Alex. And hi, no one. I say no one already. Yeah, I'm a bit confused.
Yeah, Wyatt is
hello.
right. It's a legal issue
sorry.
within Russia.
I'm a bit confused.
About this, what you said.
Yeah, Wyatt is right. It's a
You need to put
issue
sorry.
within
who
Russia.
is not having the earphone.
About this, what you said.
Yeah, Wyatt is right. It's a
You need to put who is not.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Someone is having their speaker on, which is why we can hear the feedback.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, now okay.
Someone is having their speaker on, which is why we can hear the feedback.
Can you hear me? Okay, now okay.
The echo is so bad.
Okay. And it's weird. I sometimes can hear, sometimes can't.
Yeah. So Alex, you can go ahead because you are lagging pretty badly actually.
Sometimes can't.
So Alex, you can go ahead because you are lagging pretty badly actually.
So, like, it seems that Russia is trying to fight this war on the cheap, right? It's not using its air force for whatever reason. That may be strategic. They may not want to allow NATO to test their anti-air against their air force.
Man.
Or it may be just cheaper to use mercenaries. And I think that, one of the reasons that Ukraine has a war now is because the Ukrainian soldiers are so cheap, right? They got nothing better to do. That's not their fault. Their country was a corrupt cesspit. They had no jobs. They've got African levels of income in Europe. So it's very cheap for NATO to create an army there, right? That you don't have to pay Ukrainians very much and off they'll go and fight. It's literally the best job a lot of them will ever have in terms of, for the first times in their lives, they're able to support their families, right? Again, that's not their fault. That's what happens if you are unlucky enough to be born into a failed state like Ukraine was and arguably is. And it could be paradoxically that if Russia deteriorates economically, they will actually have more soldiers that they can send to the front line because it will be more attractive to more Russians to actually go fight. This is one of the ways that states degenerate into total war. So it just seems to me that Russia, and particularly Putin, they're being very calculating about how they decide to fight. And it just doesn't seem to me that they are trying to conquer a lot of territory as fast as possible. It seems to me that they are doing what they say they want to do. They're trying to keep Ukraine out of NATO. And I also wonder if the object is to make an example of Ukraine. This is what happens if you pressure Russia. And I also wonder how much, and what maybe you think about this too, like to what extent is this all about inflation and paying for oil with US dollars or rubles? Were Russia getting sick of being paid in currency that was worth less the next day? Because after all, Saddam Hussein, when he started trading oil in euros, he got the attention of the US pretty quickly.
I think the everything that you said may have a bit here and there is all true. I don't think Russia came into this war with the intention to actually go into a trade war or to dethrone the dollar, because you can't predict this kind of thing. But it's more like, as things evolve, they realize that
they did say they weren't going to take US, they weren't going to accept payment for oil in anything except rubles, and they said that pretty quickly. Like that must have been premeditated.
Because they got sanctioned, right?
No.
So
I don't think that was.
Yeah, but they knew about the sanctions. Putin actually said that they were aware of the sanctions. Like that factored into their calculations.
To some extent, probably, but let's be real. I wouldn't put a third of my money into countries where I think I'm going to get sanctions to help. I mean,
Yeah.
a third of the Russian monetary fund was basically in Europe. And I'm not putting most of my money into countries that are going to sanction me. I think it was more something on the lines of, yeah, I invaded Crimea and nobody cared. I did it quickly and the sanctions were a joke. I'm going to do the same again and nobody's going to care. And that backfired pretty hard, I think.
On the
Well,
currency
there's
front,
a
I
lot
think
more Western investment in Russia than there is Russian investment in the West, right?
Sure.
So
But
it may
still,
be
it's
like
a lot of
I've actually done
knowledge
some
to
legal
go.
work in the past for Russian oligarchs, believe it or not, when I was living in Switzerland. And if I was a Russian oligarch and I had Americans and Brits who owned 30% of my oil well, and they were going to seize my yacht and I was going to seize their share of the oil well, that's a bargain, man, because that yacht's just, it's not making me any money. But that 30% of the oil well, and I needed their capital back then to get it up and running, but I don't need their capital now. So it may be that the Russians actually, like, they're quite happy to kick out Western investors and let the Western investors take their London properties and their yachts that they think are overvalued anyway. So, yeah, I'm not sure the sanctions really hurt the Russians that badly, especially with so much Western foreign investment in Russia.
it suits the Eurasian agenda that Putin has of taking the former oligarch class that he's largely subordinated. He's looking at the Chinese model where, when a billionaire steps up and tries to say something political, they get told to sit down and sometimes disappear from the public eye for years, like Jack Ma. Putin wants that relationship with the moneyed class. And the problem he had was a lot of them were very westernized. So now those people are subordinated, their interests are gone. Putin can build more of a CCP-style autocracy and work on Eurasian integration with China, India, and Iran. I think it does, as you said, suit their interest to have a long war so that BRICS Plus can come together. And Russia's aims at this point are economic, and military, social, other aims are pretty limited, really. I mean, they're benefiting from this BRICS Plus integration. The one thing I will generally disagree with, though, is that they actually had, this was probably their plan C. They really didn't expect Europe to go as whole hog as they have, crippling themselves. What they underestimated, though, I think, and here we get into some territory where, a lot of people who, are sympathetic to Russia's case, casus belli in the war, Donbass and so on, maybe don't understand this, or maybe they disagree. But Europe really does have a deep commitment to the so-called green agenda, and Russian conventional cheap gas was slowing down things like the transition to massive offshore or wind farms and the complete electrification of transport. Now it's no question that's going ahead. Every fever dream the Greens had about extreme conservation, insulate every building, electrify every vehicle, that is all absolutely happening and irreversible. So to that degree, the left in Europe is not particularly motivated to stop the war either until that's done. And the only time that they'll kind of, flip sides and go back to their traditional anti-NATO stance will be when U.S. LNG starts to actually show up, which, is the worst, dirtiest fuel in the world. And that's when you'll see a big reversal. So there's a dirty real politics game being played by the Greens in Europe. And that's also extending the war. And then thirdly, extending the war is the fact the Americans very much make a lot of money selling replacement weapons into Europe. They've destroyed the euro as a potential threat. And bringing this full circle back to the currency question.
Not all Americans. Some Americans make a lot of money, and some Brits and some Russians. Rich people are good at war. They tend to win it. Poor people should never go to war. They always lose.
Yeah. Agreed. I mean the moneyed class, the people that are actually making the decisions. If you go to represent.us, which is a pretty good internal survey of the issues America has domestically, one of the things they point out is that if a policy has 0% public support in the United States, it's 30% likely to get implemented. And if it has 100% public support in the United States, it's about 30% likely to get implemented. Like, it probably is worse in North Korea. I bet you in North Korea, if you have 100% public support for something, it's 31% likely, and 0% support is 29% likely. But in the United States, decision-making at the political level has absolutely nothing to do with public opinion. So even though 60, 70% of Americans want a negotiated peace, and including with territorial concessions, that's in the questions they get asked, you can't find more than like 3 people in Congress to even broach the issue. So it is a bought entity that is absolute opposite of democracy. The US, the UK, Ukraine are strict oligarchies where the rich get what they want. And all the other countries are, autocracies or varying degrees of democracy. But, there isn't really much representation going on. 90% of the world population is in countries that aren't sanctioning Russia. In the countries that are, with their 10%, 6 out of 10 want this negotiation and partition. That leaves about 4% of the world population keeping this war going, and less every month as people learn more facts about it.
Yeah, well said.
It's an elite war.
Yeah, I think all wars are, but this one is conspicuously so.
Yeah.
So who will collapse first, Ukraine or EU at this rate?
I don't know. I mean, Ukraine is a country that is being bombed by the Russians, not the EU. So I would suggest the Ukraine, but I think the refugee crisis will maybe break the EU before breaking the Ukraine. So
personally, I believe neither. The EU, if worse comes to worse, the EU just says, we don't care, we're out. We're not going to support Ukraine in any way, shape, or form. We're not going to let in any refugees whatsoever. And the US is basically going to keep the war going on their own because they have the military-industrial base to do that. And Ukraine is probably not going to collapse as long as the West or the US keeps some support.
Sebastian, what do you think of Poland? Do you think Poland is closer to the EU than it is to the US, or vice versa?
Oh, good question. Personally, I believe Poland, if Poland wasn't in NATO or the EU, they'd probably already be at the Russian border together with Ukraine. I mean, they're more than happy to just go hoorah on the Russians if they get the choice.
You think?
Yes.
In 2016, the Polish
before
government passed a law
crisis comes
that
with
said
the
that
refugees.
the Ukrainian treatment of Polish in Volhynia was a genocide. Now, that's 2 years after the coup d'etat in 2014. You think that the Polish would rather fight Russia than take back their ancestral homelands as they see it. I don't necessarily agree with that. It's complex history. But this is the fact. The fact is that Polish politicians in 2016 were deliberately stoking anti-Ukrainian sentiment. Now, whether or not it's justified, I don't get into that debate. But do you really think that Poland isn't prepared to make a peace with Russia that creates an even bigger Poland?
No. Poland is the
God bless your
the evil
sweetheart.
number one, in my opinion, for the Polish people is probably Russia.
Not for the Polish people, I think for the Polish politicians. Polish people are hard divided on this issue.
How you see a democracy. But personally, I believe Russia is enemy number one for the Polish state, if that's what you prefer.
But what if they could have both? What if they could hate the Russians and get their land back? What if they could be the liberators of Ukraine? Because I've seen the public opinion polls from Ukraine for the last 20 years. Those people want to be in Europe. They're sick of the poverty and the corruption. They would do anything to get into Europe. Even the ones that are ethnically Russian, right, want to join Europe and not Russia. If Poland was the liberator, if Poland said, we will give you all European citizenship, if that's the deal, right, I don't think there might be 3 people in Ukraine who wouldn't snatch that.
And Toby, they already do this or not? They already try to implement Polish government into Ukraine. Something I think I've heard of. I don't have like 100% information on this, but I think they're already starting to do the quote-unquote liberation things. Because you see, if you get like millions of refugees, where do you put them? You can you can't put everyone like into Poland. They need at some point to pull them back into at least into Western Ukraine. So I think they're preparing for this.
So
Maybe I'm wrong, but
that's the deal on the table. Poland protects and liberates the Ukrainians. The Russians protect and liberate the Russians. The Hungarians get their bit back. Romania don't get anything because no one likes them and they're poor. Like, right? But maybe they get Moldova because no one wants it, even though it's a nice place. That's where I see the peace being made, right? Like, if peace is going to come. Because let's not forget, Ukraine was a project of the Soviet Union.
But that's like what the
as we see it now,
Ukrainians are
was
offering,
created
right?
by the Soviet Union. Who really cares what the Soviet Union did, right? Like, who is going to die on that hill to preserve a project of the Soviet Union? I maybe I'm wrong. I'm not Eastern European. I'm married to an Eastern European, a Lithuanian, but I don't see it. I don't see anybody who's that really heavily invested in Ukraine. Not really. I mean, it's the big thing now, right? Yeah, but it wasn't a little while ago.
Well, just look at the blue and yellow flags in March versus now. It's a pretty precipitous decline when you see the number of people, the number of flags floating around. And I think, honestly, and they never existed in like Southern Europe. One of the things that's interesting about wars in North America, and being a North American, I can tell you this, people don't know anything about the place where the conflict is when it starts. And then they start to learn. They pay attention to the history of the place. They watch 100 YouTube videos. They talk to friends who are more informed. They're still being, fundamentally misled by their own state and corporate press, but they learn things. So, for instance, the fact that the Bandera is the national hero of Ukraine, and he and his factions led genocides of Jews and Roma and Russians in World War II, and of Poles in Volhynia in 43, 45, and that there are memorials to the victims of Bandera and the OUN in Eastern Ukraine, Eastern former Ukraine, places now claimed by Russia. That kind of fact comes out. And then when you start to see people on the streets actually declaring themselves to be proud Nazis, and they think that is actually convergent with Ukrainian identity, and then you hear over and over again use of dehumanizing terms like orcs, racist terms, to describe Russians as an ethnicity, not just as invaders. And then that you don't see Russians doing that. It changes minds.
That's kind of harsh. I mean, it's always easier to just dehumanize your enemy in a war. And that's
not MPs on television in the West. Not MPs on television in the West. Every time an Ukrainian MP does that on a North American TV show, they lose a chunk of the population. And I'm telling you, they've lost a majority, and they're not getting it back.
No.
Canada, my country, is pretty famous for having jumped into World War II in 1939 when it didn't have to. And vast numbers of men volunteered. There was never combat conscription in Canada. And the Canadian identity is largely formed on the battlefields of World War I and II with opposition to genocidal racism as the fundamental thing. Now, that's pretty weird for a country that actually, engaged in genocidal policies against its own natives. But that's the contradiction that is Canada. So when you tell a Canadian that we're on the Nazi side, that's like telling him his whole concept of his country ceased to exist. That's taken very seriously here, despite a very large number of, especially here in Eastern Canada, where I am, where we fought the Battle of the Atlantic. So there may be a lot of Nazi sympathizers and Ukro nationalists and people that put orcs in flames on a drink menu at a Ukrainian restaurant in Edmonton out west. But that sentiment doesn't exist in the East, where we're closer to Europe. And this stuff does really, really matter. Like, I guarantee you that percentage of people, that somewhere between 50 and 70% of people that wants a negotiated, maybe partition solution in Ukraine, that number grows markedly when they discover that there isn't just a simple little Azov battalion. There's Azov, Idar, Tornado, Kraken, C-14 Svoboda, Right Sector. And these guys keep using the patches of Nazi units. These guys keep talking the way that Nazis talked. They have a contradictory definition of who's a Ukrainian based upon Russian Orthodox religion or or mother tongue in the household. And this stuff is noticed. I guarantee you this is how North American public opinion has been permanently lost in this war. Nobody in North America would actually, I think, volunteer for a war where invasion of Crimea, which is 90% ethnic Russian, was on the table. And it's actually an elite group in Canada too, including especially Chrysler Freeland, Deputy Prime Minister, that prevented Canada from playing its traditional sort of mediating, peacemaking detente role in the last 7-8 years. You know, we weren't negotiating Crimea because of this absolutist pro-nationalist stance that was reflected by a few people that happen to have power. But it's not a public opinion. The public opinion is genocidal, racist Nazis are inherently much, much worse than anything any communist regime ever did. You can join jihadis, you can join communists, but if you got the wrong parents, you can't join the Nazis. So when they're all physically exterminated, you can talk peace, not before. That's our view of the 1945 and since peace, that Nazis aren't part of it, and they can't be on the map at the end. So when you look at how this thing ends, I don't think it ends with a rump state of Bandera still there. I think it ends with Poland, Hungary, Romania taking back oblasts that used to be in Poland, Hungary, Romania. And I think it ends with not even a Belarus class puppet state that has torn the Bandera statues down and completely rewritten the history that was taught to children in the last 20, 30 years, which is literally Nazi glorification. And I think the whole war, public support of the war in North America kind of fringes on those points. We accepted Yugoslavia being broken up. I think we'd accept Ukraine being broken up. And it's too damn bad that Ukraine chose not to be a multi-ethnic, autonomy guaranteeing provincial structure like Canada. We'd still be at war 50 years after the FLQ crisis in Quebec if we took the attitude that the post-coup government took in Kiev. Instead, Quebec was given extreme autonomy by Western standards, and the country's still together. So you turn off that path and you turn onto the Yugoslavia path, I think.
You said that there couldn't, whether or not Ukraine is a Nazi state. Personally, I don't believe they are. You are entitled to your opinion.
It's not an opinion. It's Bandera statues all over the place. Like that's your national hero.
What I'm trying to ask yourself is, you said there cannot be after this a Ukrainian state because the Nazis cannot be on the map after the war.
I agree. That's exactly what I said.
This is the North American Anglo historical cultural belief, whether or not it's true.
Germany was divided up into at least 6 countries, got parts of it, compared to its pre-war borders.
It's illegal to talk well about the Nazis in Germany.
If you can't even talk about Nazism, the country was denazified by the Soviets and all the other occupiers. It's largely pacifist now, and it's still occupied. So the Nazi state there doesn't exist now. No.
If I may, Sebastian, you have to understand that what we're talking about here isn't the truth, right? This is what Anglos believe. If the Nazis aren't the very worst that ever was, then gee, we killed a lot of people in the Second World War, and what for, right? Like this is something that we need to believe, right? And this is why I'm very cynical about the way that the whole Nazi thing has been sort of like just quietly spoon-fed to us in the Anglo nations, because I've seen the opinion polls. The reality is that fewer than 3% of Ukrainians belong to any political party for the last 20 years. That's the facts, right?
Yep.
So how is this a nation of Nazis? Bullshit. The other thing is the guy who paid for Zelensky is named Kolomoisky, right? And I don't know if you know about Kolomoisky, but he's a notorious gangster, and he's Jewish, right? Or he claims to be. He paid for the Azov battalion to manufacture these huge flags, right, of SS symbols and wave them around in the world, right? Victoria Nuland, who's a Jew and who's married to a Jew, both from Lithuania, whose people were brutalized by the Nazis. They were funding, right, these Nazi symbols. And the people they were giving them to were 17-year-old football hooligans. These guys didn't know
Yeah.
anything about the National Socialist Party of Germany, right?
Yeah.
They didn't know what they were being handed. These propaganda symbols, and the camera just happened to be there. It's like, you know, the thing is, if the Western media don't want you to see something, right, it's pretty hard to see it. And
Right. So
and there's nobody that I know in the Anglo world that isn't painfully aware that Ukraine has got Nazis in it. I'm very skeptical. I think Ukraine's got a lot of poor people in it. I think Ukraine's got a lot of manipulated people in it. And so, Sebastian, you got to understand, we're not talking about truth here. We're talking about what Anglos need to believe, right? Because otherwise our grandparents weren't heroes fighting on the side of warm puppies and all good things, right?
Right. That's
So-
the Commonwealth
Sorry,
identity case.
Shall
Yeah,
I
I agree.
express also my opinion? Okay, so I think that it's about utilizing these groups and not supporting their ideology as a thing to stay there forever. And it's also not a lie that people that are fanatics, like they support this kind of ideas, they are better warriors. So why not to fund Nazis in Ukraine? But not only that, we should not forget that before the 2014, the country that had the most Nazis was Russia.
Yeah, exactly right.
But it's not that I'm trying to blame Russia, but I'm trying to explain that there is a Nazi culture in all post-Soviet countries. But this trend, let's say, it's not about an actual belief in Nazism. It's in a sense an anti-communism, but not in the communism as a whole, but to this part that supported the atheism in post-imperial Russian states or whatever. Because the truth is that all the Slavs, all the populations of the post-Russian Empire, they were brutalized by these communist policies of atheism and suppressing their culture. So then the Nazism for them is more about, let's say, a religious enlightenment and a kind of nationalism, and not Nazism in its brutalism substance of killing and murdering people. It was just more about using the symbols, like being a fanatic of a football team.
Yeah.
Something that, if you think about it, most of the neo-Nazis were also hooligans. And
Georgios is right, especially in the Baltics.
Yeah.
In the Baltics, that's very true.
So I would think, no, if you didn't finish, if you're talking about the Nazis themselves, they basically allied with everyone who could support their cause during the Second World War. So it's not about just ideology. It's more about anybody who could fight the communists in 1941 at that time, because they needed enough troops to hold the front. Similar situation is today, but the scale is much bigger. So if we are looking at Ukraine permanently being Nazified because they supported the Russians at that time, I don't think that's the correct perspective. It's actually
That's not why.
Speaking earlier that we have a lot of symbols which have come in, a lot of people who didn't grow up in that era, and they don't really understand what it means actually to support the Nazis. It's more about, this is my enemy, somebody else is fighting my enemy, let's support them. So as soon as the Second World War ended, and I mean, when they initially invaded, the Germans were actually welcomed by the Ukrainians and a large part of the occupied Eastern Europe areas, because the communist regime was that brutal. And in fact, if you look at the Warsaw Uprising later on, it was that brutal. Even the next 20, 30 years. That's why Poland still hates Russia. Does the average population really hate Russia in that deep seething regard as the Nazis do? No, not really. But mostly people would not be happy with the Russians because that's what they've been taught. And I think what's happened is in the 90s, there were still a lot of people who had some sympathy towards Russia. But as if you look at television discourse, movies, anything, any media, we find that the Russians are really the villains everywhere. So if you grow up in an era where the young people come across the Russians as the bad people, and the EU and the euro is now where it is, and it's now a monolithic world in which the Americans are dictating everything. In that case, would you ally yourself with the Russians? And then you will see that your country has some hero symbols who had fought the Russians. What was the SS? Yeah, nobody really needs to dig into it. How many people really dig into which divisions and which commanders did what, who was which country? Because if you actually look into the war crimes, it's quite clear that even the people who joined the SS battalions from the Ukrainian side, they too indulged in some of those crimes. So they don't really get into the nuances of all of this.
Some of the worst ones, actually.
Do people hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I just want to, thanks for having me on. I just wanted to kind of, I made an observation that kind of relates to both Toby, Captain Georgia, and Abhinav, and that's kind of how it kind of, we can kind of see the identity politics being infused in all of this. Like, for example, the Jews being collaborating with Nazis and so forth. But kind of dismissing as if Jews cannot be opportunistic itself, but in the same way as Obama being the first black president, with the incarceration of African Americans increased with his, and so on and so on. And then, as Abhinav kind of, I would say, astutely pointed out, you can have all these ideologies and dogmas going about. These are mostly used to sway the majority, but when it boils down to the realpolitik of it all, you can see like, oh yeah, ideological enemies, we can still have, we're supposed to not be on the same team, but we can help you. Like, and here we have, Victoria Nuland and Zelensky, what does it even mean being Jewish? What does it mean being Ukrainian or Slav? This becomes incredibly diffused very quickly, but we see the propaganda from both sides, of course, in all directions, tend to be kind of playing on these age-old concepts. And I just kind of noticed, like, as you guys are talking about it, like it's kind of unavoidable at this point, noticing how like the conflation of historical relevance, but it is a very subjective application of how important it is, and it's very selective when it is even applied. So yeah, I just like the nuances and would like to point that out.
I have a question I'd like to put to everybody here, right? This is about the word sovereignty, right? Because we've got Sebastian, we've got people from all over here. Now, you all seem pretty well educated. We understand that sovereignty has changed its meaning throughout the ages, right? Mm-hmm. Originally, sovereignty meant the sovereign rights of kings, monarchs, and then it became the sovereign right of states. And then you had the emergence of this concept of the sovereignty of the people. It seems to me that when Ukrainian commentators on the YouTube start talking about the orcs, right, from Russia, they lose like most of the modern world, right? From everywhere, especially throughout Asia and the rest of it. Like, I've got Vietnamese friends, they don't like hearing that kind of language, right? They really don't. Nobody does, right? Even from countries like my country, Australia, where we committed gross genocides, right? And as guilty as anybody historically. I don't believe in historical guilt, but even here, it's not acceptable to talk that way. And when people are using the word sovereignty with regard to Ukraine, the sovereignty of the people who live in Crimea, the sovereignty of the people, not the state, right? And the sovereignty of the people in Donbass is invisible. It seems like we're back in the Middle Ages. We're talking about the sovereignty of the king of Ukraine or something, or the sovereignty of states. Yep. So I wonder about like this argument about sovereignty. It's like, are we talking about the sovereignty of people, or are we talking about the sovereignty of states? Because one is a lot.
It's about the sovereignty of the people in the new UN Charter. Charter 1 in paragraph
right.
2. It talks about, it states about the self-determination of the people, not of the state, not of like the king.
That's
And,
right. We've done.
Maybe we agree on this paragraph or not, but that's the law, and you cannot escape it if you consider yourself to go in accordance to the international law.
Yeah. Actually,
sorry.
I have one example, like kind of example is like the Solomon Islands is like I think a year ago where the Solomon Islands were trying to sign a peace, like a defense, like some kind of defense treaty with China, and then Australia and New Zealand were saying that's I forgot what they were trying to say, but they said that was not in their interest, and they didn't really respect the Solomon Islands sovereign right to choose whether they want to join China or not. But that's one of the examples. I feel like 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 how NATO and Russia and all of the other countries like want to look into their own interests. Like how the United States wants to weaken Russia as their adversary. They want to like bleed it like at least so it won't be able to fight. For some years and all that. And sort of like China wants to become the dominant Pacific power in Asia, and that's one of their interests. And like there's a lot of countries that like have their own interests and goals. It doesn't really matter whether they're insulting your sovereignty. They just want to go for it. So basically, it's basically human history. People invade each other and people disagree. It's like.
Manny, sorry for interjecting, but I just wonder, do people around here, would you think it would be conducive to kind of distinguish between a sovereign state and a sovereign people? Because, like take any example, really, you can have a sovereign state, they take their own decisions. But then we come to something a little bit more confusing, like Ukraine, where you have like people wanting their own sovereignty independent of the state and so forth. And back to what Toby were talking about, they kind of like what is sovereignty? I think it's like I think we can all kind of agree that.
Well, who is sovereign? Who is sovereign? The monarch sovereign or the people sovereign?
The people. We can take an example. For example, the Crimea and this area in the Ukraine, right? So, like, in principle, we can probably agree to some extent that Russia is correct at going through referendums for the people to decide their own sovereignty. But I'm sure most of us can also see, like, right through that there's far too many errors or flaws with that referendum to be considered legitimate. But as in the...
I agree.
Well, I would say so.
No, because
I
guess UN disagreed on that.
No, yeah, I understand what you guys are saying, right? But if you want to make it indisputable, if Russia had all of the territories and they had all of the population actually voting in for it, there won't be any dispute. Now there is a dispute, and that way the sovereignty of the state becomes more relevant than the sovereignty of the people. Because yes, most people here probably did want to join Russia, given the choice of Russia or Ukraine. But did they have if they had a realistic choice of, for example,
they had the Minsk. Sorry for interrupting, but they had the Minsk agreements. Okay, and also the Donetsk Republic accused Russia of not wanting them to be part of Russia because Russia said autonomy inside the Ukraine. That was the initial discussion, but it was the Ukrainian that, in fact, rejected the Minsk agreements that they signed.
Sure. I'm not really getting into, like, I get what you're saying, and I would say you are correct. But my point is kind of more like, as we are trying to assess, like back to kind of what Toby were alluding to, what is sovereignty really like? Yeah, and in this is a great example, I would say, because there are obviously, like, you can say, like, yes, I would say on this side mostly it is, and on that side mostly, but it isn't clear cut. And it's very hard to kind of be like, here being like an armchair expert and stating this would be the legitimate, this would be the illegitimate. We are not even the people living there and generally have to deal with this. So, like, but the people there, are they actually given a fair choice? Because I would consider it a false duality to have, like, and this is through the intercessions of, to a large extent, the West, not really allowing for any diplomatic solutions, with Russia either, makes it for that the people living there in the East Ukraine, they have basically just two options. They cannot be their own state, really. They cannot be autonomous or their own state. They have to join Russia or Ukraine. And considering the history of the civil war, obviously going back to Ukraine, like I certainly would not be one of those who would go for that. But Russia is also, it has its issues. I'm not pretty sure there are quite a lot of Ukrainians there that would think like, yeah, I'm very appreciative that they came and helped us, they've defended us, but do I really want to be a part of this huge juggernaut? Like, am I really more free and have more sovereignty when I'm suddenly incorporated into this massive, the biggest nation in the world? So it's
which is hugely corrupt. If we're Sebastian, what do you think of the concept of sovereignty? Because, the Europeans, they developed a lot of this thought, and I know, you guys have complex thoughts on this. So speak, man.
To be honest, sovereignty is, sovereignty of the people in a state, but you have to break it down to some extent, because if you say every part of the people has its own sovereignty, then you have to abandon the notion of a nation state, basically. Because if I got you correctly, or I think what you tried to tell me, then you put forward the notion that Donbas people decided they no longer wanted to be part of Ukraine, something like that. But to some extent, if you live in a democracy, you have to accept the notion that sometimes you're not in the majority. Sometimes you have to bow to the majority. You can't, if you want to live in a nation state, and we have to, that's basically not negotiable, because if you don't, good luck surviving. You have to accept that you're not everything you want is going to be put through, is my notion on this.
So how do you feel about?
However, that's why the minorities are protected.
What about Kosovo?
You have to protect the minorities.
No, the state comes first. I think this is a historical conflict, right? I think it's one of those verbs where, like, if I want to break up your state and take part of it for myself and balkanize it, well, then it's the sovereignty of the people all day. But if someone's trying to do that to me, it's the sovereignty of the nation state, you understand, and we all have to make sacrifices. So I think this is a very flexible notion, sovereignty. And this is why I think, it's not a strong argument. The argument for the Ukrainian side is that's our land. And the argument from the Russians is those are our people, right? The people are going to win.
And in both
the thing is that the common language is the international law, and the international law, it's very vague in this
that they
aspect.
Did want to be part of Russia.
Sorry?
The notion of claiming that those are our people is, I'm sorry, but that's bullshit. If
it might be, but that's the argument.
Kherson are my people, and
well, it's bullshit to say it's their land. I'm not arguing
you are
missing
8 years, right? But you are missing 8 years. They were alone for 8 years.
No, look, Sebastian makes a good point. You can't just accept the Russian position. But I'm not arguing the truth, Sebastian. I'm saying this is the lexicon that both sides have chosen. The Ukrainians are making the argument that that is our land. The Russians are making the argument that those are our people. Now, whether or not it's true, these are the things that have been said again and again and again and again. And what do we do when we hear things again and again? We believe it, right? Because that's what we're like.
Not that's what they claim.
Okay, let me put a question.
Decide on what we want to do, on what the other wants to do. And the Russians claim those are our people, and we annex their oblasts to make them those people that are part of our ethnicity, and integrate them into our country. And at the first sign of trouble, I'm leaving most of the population behind, I'm sorry, but I'm pretty damn sure that's not a good argument for anyone else who might want to join, probably not anymore, my country.
I think what a lot of people in Europe and especially the Americas miss is that most of Africa and Asia is dealing with these sovereignty problems for a while now, especially in the last few decades. So, taking the Indian perspective, for example, India has border conflicts with China and Pakistan very, very clearly. And there is definitely some similarity between what's happening in Ukraine, with one country claiming that this area belongs to us, and these people don't get, even if there are elections, you don't really get power because there's no autonomy of our people. And then there's a difference of religion in the Indian subcontinent. But even if we see in Africa, if we look at how Sudan was divided or Congo was divided, really it's much more complex than what the West would have us believe, which is why we actually see Russia is getting much more support from Asia and Africa than in the West, because the West simply doesn't understand that these problems exist. For them, sovereignty has been solved 100 years ago. We won the war. We won clean and square. We divided it across straight lines on a chart, especially in Canada, for example, or in Africa. I mean, just look at Texas and New Mexico. You know what I'm talking about. Or Hawaii for that matter. I mean, if you look at the problems that the Russians are facing, all of these were solved on the battlefield for most of the West, including Germany for that matter. So First World War German borders versus the Second World War German borders are very different. And how are the Germans okay with that? Because it was solved on the battlefield. And so the Russians really are trying to solve it on the battlefield, because then you have a lasting agreement which remains binding, because you know that when it's signed, if something happens, we are going to war again, and we are capable enough of having an unconditional surrender from the other end. If the agreement is signed like it was in the Minsk in 2014, where the side wasn't soundly defeated, you're going to have that idea that we can strike again. We just didn't negotiate well enough at the right time. So really, I think at this point of time, the Russians would be in their best interest to try as hard as possible to win. And same point from the Ukrainians, although I think the possibility of the Ukrainians being able to do that is
the problem with Minsk was that the Americans didn't sign up to it.
And neither the Germans or French, right?
So Minsk could have worked if Americans had signed up to it, and therefore they couldn't supply weapons.
I think for the US, the problem was about the prestige. They could not let Russia start to winning. I think that was like their main problem. I don't think that they had any very special interest in the area.
Their interest was depleting Russia's military capability, surely.
But
that was their direct interest.
In our days, what matters is the economic strength, and Russia is not strong on that. So why do they care? It's about prestige. As long as you have prestige, you can have countries rely on your economic aid, for example. And if Russia starts to win small or bigger wars, then more countries will accept the dominance of Russia and the help and the Russian influence, etc. So I think that the whole situation from the American perspective, the political American perspective, was about not letting Russia getting prestige. But there are also different perspectives, like from the militarily industrial complex that they want to sell their weapons. So especially in the US, that has a lot of different institutions / poles, they have their own interests. And I think their interest inclined in this conflict. But generally speaking, I think that this war is much different than we thought. So let me have some minutes to explain my perspective. So I think that let's go some days before the start of the special military operation. I was 1,000% sure that Russia will not attack. But why? The reason is that in terms of purely militarily perspective, you cannot attack a 50 million people country with 150,000 soldiers. That's not possible. And with that frontier, you cannot do this. So what Russians did was the largest and the strongest military coup in the history of humanity. That's why they march with their tanks in the streets. The tanks, they go as phalanx, not as they were not deployed in a position to fight, and they get the javelins and all this kind of fire and etc. But
I think that's right, because Putin also sacked his intelligence chief afterwards. Clearly, he'd been told that the Ukrainians were going to welcome them with open arms and have a coup, and that was how it was going to go down, right? And then when that didn't happen,
be careful. He was right. He was right about what he said, because why the Ukrainians resisted? They resisted because of the propaganda of the West. Because come on,
they want to be in Europe, man. Like if you're just objective and you read the opinion polling for the last 20 years, they tell you what they want, right? They want to be in Europe.
Sorry.
Nearly all of them.
Politicians
Even the Russians want to be in Europe.
Not all of them. Not all of them.
When I'm saying propaganda, it's about how the Russian military acted in Ukraine. They wanted to persuade the Ukrainian people that the Russian army came to murder you. So what they achieved the Ukrainian people to resist or to enlist when the conscription in Ukraine occurred. So they tried to create the special military operation from the side of Russia to a war similar to one that happened in Vietnam. Like think about Vietnam. Why the Americans went there? They went for political reasons. They went to have a pro-Western government in Vietnam, not to conquer Vietnam. However, because they bombed the people, they slaughtered the people in the villages, then this war became more of a war of liberation from the perspective of the Vietnamese people in general, both in North and in South. So that was the same thing that the West tried to do in Ukraine. If we take in mind the new strategy of Russia, of the General Surovikin, what he's doing, he just not exactly halted the operations, but he's just trying to hold the line. He's attacking the electrical stations, and he's putting a political question to the people. Will you like to live without electricity in a misery? Yes or not? So that's how the Russians counter the Vietnamization of the conflict. And I think in the end, the Ukrainian people will accept.
Hey, Captain Georgios.
They say, we don't want to live like that. Okay, let's bring another person to govern us and go in the table and talk. Just to talk. We'll find a solution, but not with this misery. And of course, there are other factors for the Russia that they don't want to kill their soldiers and having their mothers to cry out on the streets, like what happened in the US during the Vietnam War.
So
But,
basically,
but
that's what Russia is doing right now. So they're striking critical infrastructure, and like most of the country doesn't even have electricity and clean water to support their families or
and so
people.
Russia doesn't actually have to conduct an offensive. Like that's actually an option. The question on the title of this video: who will conduct an
They don't
offensive?
have.
Russia doesn't
They
actually
don't
have
have.
to. They can actually just hold it because now the Ukrainians, it's the impetus is on them to have an offensive, and if that is of course more costly, and so it is more Russia can just take its time. What is a little bit of territory? It's still more territory than they had in the outset. So they don't actually have to conduct an
Why?
offensive. Destroy their electrical infrastructure, having the population itself more or less say like, come on, now let's negotiate a peace. No matter what, let's forget the Donbass. We want our lights back. Russia can do that by basically doing nothing.
What about the idea that Russia is ethnically cleansing Ukraine, pushing the majority of the civilian population into Poland so that they can then take it over?
I want to say
well, that is
that's the after day.
But that's what the Ukrainians were trying to do to them, right? In the east, the Ukrainians wanted to ethnically cleanse that place of Russians. They said as much, and now look. The thing you guys need to understand is, like, everybody in Ukraine has family relations who are Russian, right? So people can flip on a dime. They can be Ukrainian one day and Russian the next, and if they've got a Polish granddad, they can be Polish the next day as well. It's all very, very flexible, right? And there are family relations everywhere. Everybody who's sympathetic to Russia has already left Ukraine, right? That means that the Russians will bomb that place back into the Neolithic, and they don't care. No one in Ukraine loves Russia anymore.
Maybe.
The public sympathy for the Ukrainians in Russia is about zero. They will bomb those cities flat. They will Iraq that place, right? There are going to be hundreds of thousands of people who die there, and the Russians won't care. So we're entering this phase of ethnic cleansing, and I think from the Russian perspective, they don't care. It's like now the Russians are starting to make the land sovereignty. That's our land. Get out, go back to Poland or whatever. So this is why
there are a lot of people that just want
peace.
peace. I think that's wrong. You can't say that they're divided.
They're not making
black and white.
No.
That's wrong. That's wrong, and I will tell you
for the
why.
reason for the.
Let's do not forget that they are similar people. They are not different. Come on, Ukraine means edge. That's the meaning of Ukraine, edge. But edge of what? Of which country? Of Russia. They're just different branch of Russian people. Come on. Their hate is temporary. When they will get, like, let's say the hypothesis that they become a sort of a part of Russia or a country affiliated to Russia like Belarus, and they receive the money to rebuild all this destroyed infrastructure, houses, everything. They will forget it. Like most of the people, they will forget it as long as they will get their lives back, because you cannot take their blood back. As you said, they have relatives in Russia. Most of them, they speak the Russian language. This is what will stay forever. It was and will stay forever. What they have is anger, and you can take the anger. You can erase this anger very quickly nowadays just by throwing money. And I think Russia is capable of throwing money.
If
complex.
The Ukrainians had not been supplied with weapons or thought they were going to be supplied with weapons, this would never have happened.
Absolutely.
Right?
It's
so therefore, when we talk about Ukrainians having left, etc., no, that's not true. There's still a whole mass of people. First of all, there are plenty of Ukrainians in the Donbass that want to be aligned with Russia and have done for years and years and years, as in Crimea. But secondly, there are still lots of people that want peace. They don't care. Now, if they're offered American support, that's different. But as soon as that American tap is turned off, where are they going to go? Are they going to rely on Germany? Who are they going to rely on? Who's going to be their defender?
Common people do not care about politics and war. Common people care about their lives.
Sure.
Right. And that's actually the genesis of the conflict. If you look at the 1990s, when Russia had just become a democratic country, and they were trying. What we first saw is that Russia was, all the state assets were divided and sold to oligarchs at virtually no cost. And this was overseen by the West. So the Russians, they gave up their economy to the West to do what capitalism does. And then they didn't really do what capitalism really is from a technical perspective, but basically it was just sold to the lowest bidder, not
It
the
was a
highest.
theft.
It was absolute naked theft.
Well,
And then
capitalism
that same thing happened to Ukraine. And so the West has been giving all of these assurances of weapons, which is fine. But where are the factories? Where are the jobs? I mean, people, what you were talking about, that people need jobs, people would forget everything. Actually, the problem is that even in 2014, the Russians said we'll give more than the European Union would give. And then there was that orchestrated coup. But really, at the end of the day, the people of Ukraine received neither the Russian aid nor the European Union aid. They received nothing for the last 20 to 30 years. Their country is reduced to absolute ruins. This is the country where the Second World War was principally fought and which was the main base for the USSR throughout. I mean, if we really look at Russian history, it's Ukrainian history because all of the wars happened through that channel. And this was the place which was able to economically sustain everything. Now they have the natural resources, but they have no capacity to actually utilize them. I mean, they're an agrarian country. It's fighting a war. How are you going to do agriculture in such a situation? And if really Russia wants to reduce Ukraine, they can just destroy the land. If you reduce the agricultural land just through warfare, you can ensure that nothing really grows in that land for a fairly long time to come. If Russia
Agent
wants
Orange
to eliminate
quite well in Vietnam.
That's why, if you think about this war, the correct way to look at it is like put from one side the war and from the other to put the political pressure. Russia is trying to put the political pressure. Okay, they put the political pressure, and the West is trying to, with propaganda, to make this look like a war to annihilate Ukrainian people, not the state. So that's what they are doing. And as I said, the Russians they are hitting the energy in order to make it again political. That's how it seems to work. Because as you said, if they wanted, they could make them, they put all Ukraine into fire. They have the capabilities.
No, they
And I think that's why a
They
lot
do.
of people said that the Russia will end this war in 1 week. Because everyone thought about sock-and away tactics, like what the Americans done in Iraq. Like put the massive firepower, make a breakthrough in Ukraine, having soldiers, citizens running away, capturing Zelensky and ending up this.
On this point, Wyatt, I have a question for you and anyone else that knows about this. Why haven't we seen Russian air power in this war?
Because they weren't able to destroy. Wait, go ahead, Captain. My bad.
Why do we need the air power to hit what?
You
don't need it.
Wait,
air power is
think about it.
It's one of the most effective
think about it
force
differently.
multipliers.
Roughly, Ukraine has 45 million people population. Do you know what is the effective number of fully conscription, like the Ukraine did? Perhaps 15 million people, and they only managed to muster 1 million people. Why? Because they don't support this war.
No.
That's why.
No.
The numbers
I mean,
themselves speak.
What was it the French had about in World War II, which was a much more bodied war?
French have time
at around what, 5 million, 7 million at max.
So why haven't we seen the Russian Air Force again? Like that's
I can answer this question. From my point of view, is they have so much rockets. They shoot at so much rockets. Why do you need airplanes that can be shot down with the plane and pilot can die also? When you have like thousands of rockets every day, like people ask.
So I can answer that question if you want. To answer that question, an Su-34 can carry 12 tons of guided munitions, right? 24 tons of guided munitions. One caliber rocket is 1 ton. A caliber rocket costs $1.5 million. 24 tons of guided munitions costs about $2.5 million. The Su-34 can deliver that all day, all night, one after the other, right? Air power is a fantastically cheap way of dropping a bunch of.
How much does the plane cost?
So why
and how much does the pilot cost?
Do you think that's why they're not using it, because they're afraid of the anti-air?
Yes.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay, interesting. Okay, fair
Yeah,
enough.
you gotta take care of
That was my
the
question.
air
That's where I'm getting at. Like, I wonder about that. You know?
Like,
Ukraine inherited a huge stockpile of the ex-Soviet anti-aircraft weapons, because the Soviet Union was totally in on anti-aircraft because the West was aircraft all the way, and they couldn't match that. So the Soviet Union basically said, okay, we have to go anti-aircraft guns everywhere, and Ukraine inherited a lot from that.
So
they still have a huge inventory of aerodynamic capabilities.
I mean, there's a difference between war now and earlier. If you look at suppression of enemy air defense systems, basically, so you have the fighter sweeps and you have the SEAD missions to eliminate all air defense. And you can use the same missiles which the US is using, I think, the HARMS. The Russians also have the similar missiles. But the thing is, you can only fire them once the radar is turned on. So you do need to take some risk, be within range, have long enough for the missile to be guided to the target, or it might be a fire and forget, which are more expensive. But the point is, you wouldn't be sure till you're in the area to be certain that the target has been destroyed. And we're not talking about SA-8s, SA-6s. We're talking SA-13s. They're talking much more advanced anti-aircraft. Basically, even the AAA, the flak that they're using, they are now NATO. These are not weapons which the Ukrainians could afford on their own dime, usually. They're using very sophisticated weapons. So the Russians, then, they are prepared for an air war, but they are also waiting for the contingency that NATO enters the war, in which case they would require the Russian fighter force to actually be able to fight. If you look at the performance of the Russian fighter force, they have been excellent. It's really the bombers which have failed. And the bombers have failed because you don't really want to lose your top bombers to enemy air defense systems when NATO could be the real
Sorry, but not only
that.
Not only that, but Russia doesn't have a proper strike aircraft like F-35. They don't have such a weapon yet. So the aircraft that they will send, it's in a risk of.
That's not. I mean, you just really require a weapon system which can deploy. So if you can deploy a HARM to a MiG-29 as well, which has been done. So the Ukrainians are actually using the MiG-29 to deploy the HARMs. So you can use the aircraft to destroy. The problem is that if the weapon system is too far inside, so Wyatt always, when he does the summary, he talks about how far inside the aircraft was shot down. That's very relevant because you would basically, so if you don't want to cross the border, you will come close, you will try to have the enemy turn on their radar, and then you will make them fire. So that, but that places that you at risk. So ideally, you wouldn't want to cross. If you do cross, you're seeing a lot more enemy systems which you didn't even know existed. So the Russians haven't really gone deep in and don't really know how many enemy defense systems exist, actually.
Right.
They did know at the beginning of the war, they no longer know. And they don't know where they're deployed. And a lot of NATO weaponry has come in. They don't really understand what their ranges are, how effective they are.
I think that must be right, because in the beginning, they were always talking about how many they destroyed.
Okay, so I want to add my opinion. So why we are not seeing the massive Russian air power like how we see in the Gulf War is one of the big reasons I believe is that they are holding back. What Russians are holding back because to Russia the real threat is NATO. It's not Ukraine. As far as my coverage go, I believe that the Ukrainian Air Force, the original Ukrainian Air Force, was already wiped out within the first month to third month. By third month, I don't really report much of any shoot downs. Then came after that, we came all these main refurbished one, or the ones coming from the Eastern Europe fighters. That's when we start to see Ukrainian Air Force again. So that's one reason. The second reason is Russia do not use Air Force the same way as the Americans. If you look at how
different doctrine.
Yeah, totally different. So for example, we talk about how the Americans fought the Gulf War. They sent in all the fighters, the stealth bombers, and then the B-52s, and then they hit all the infrastructures. The Russians didn't plan to hit all the infrastructure, which is also part of the reason why we didn't see massive air power. Second thing is that the infrastructures are still destroyed by now. So and this is all launched by cruise missiles and also air launched cruise missiles. So how I look at it was that a lot of these bombs that the Russians are using are all cruise missiles, even though they are all launched from the air power, but they don't even need to get close to the border to launch on all these missiles. So sometimes it's very mind blowing when they say, they use the massive bombers to bomb certain places, but you don't really see the planes fly over because they are all using cruise missiles. So
but what Toby was trying to say was why they don't use conventional bombs, not cruise bombs and deploy them from the Russian border.
So if you're talking about dumb bombs, they did use only in very rare instances where the surface to air missile system was totally wiped out. So I did see them used in Spurny.
In Mariupol, I think also, right? In Mariupol, in the Azovstal things.
Yeah, and
I think it was also bombers.
It's very
there
rare.
There were also some Su-34 strikes in Kherson, like one or two. I remember you reported.
Couple.
Yeah. So it's very rare because the danger of even manpads is it's crazy.
Right.
So they are not taking all these risks because there's no need for them to take risks. They already wipe out the Ukrainian Air Force 3 times already. So they first the original Air Force, then the reinforced Air Force, then the refurbished the old aircraft Air Force. It's all gone. What is the last time you see the Ukrainian videos of Ukrainian Air Force nowadays? We hardly see them anymore because I think most of them are all wiped out or they do not dare to fly. So we still have the Ukrainian Air Force trying to intercept the drones. We don't even see these Air Force fighters anymore. So and that was like a month ago at least. So the Russians don't really need to inject such massive air power. I think they are reserving all this air power in case they need to go to war with NATO, which they don't think it will happen, but they have to do the due diligence. Because if Russia lose all
right? They have to show.
Yeah. So you don't even say half.
I think Abhinav is also right. I think maybe that's what he said is true, that they're very wary of the NATO anti-air. Like they suffered so badly with their tanks. I think that they're being very cautious about what kind of anti-air NATO has supplied. Because if it's as effective as the javelins, they'll lose a lot of pilots, a lot of planes.
Yeah, and the Ukrainians do have the planes, but they have to be constantly moving because if they just stay in one spot for like probably an hour or 5 hours, it'll just be destroyed.
And something else you guys were talking about, why aren't they using conventional aircraft? Why would you have to use a conventional aircraft or even a cruise missile if you have functionally but also a functionally infinite amount of cheap plastic drones that you can use all day long?
Yeah.
And also they lost a lot of Air Force at the beginning of the war, so I think it was very costly for them to realize how effective their own.
It's like they burned their hand. It's like they burned their hand on the skillet, and they don't want to go all the way in anymore.
And also, all the
if you have the option of using your aircraft uninterrupted, that's 10 times better than any drone could.
Oh no,
because
absolutely.
just the amount of ordnance you can deliver precisely wherever you need it.
Yeah, big
so that's the reason why Global Hawk is a thing. It has the capabilities of an aircraft coupled with the independence of a drone. So if they had the choice, I'm pretty damn sure they would use fixed-wing aircraft.
Yeah,
I think they also don't have the intelligence of the positions, because in an aircraft, I mean, you would first meet the targets designated, And the problem is, if you switch the targets all the time, you wouldn't have the designation to actually hit them. So the aircraft would be more effective, provided you know where the targets are. And the problem is the Ukrainians do know this, and they are moving everything in real time. So, and the Russian command and control really doesn't help. By the time the information really reaches the pilot, it's already out of date. So they can really hit static infrastructure. But
speaking of
sometimes
that,
I wonder if the Russians are going to learn how to do American air war doctrine in this war. Right? That would be an own goal from NATO. If the Russians actually work out how to do what the US. I mean, I agree with you, Sebastian. I'm skeptical, but if it happens, well, that sucks.
No, but they won't do it.
They would have to put up those flying hours a lot, because I think the Russians only fly like 80 to 100 hours a year. And they don't have any dedicated anti-seed mission types like the wild weasels. So
don't worry, they have the crash course now. You know, they're gonna fly like 100 hours every week until they are like go nuts.
I think that the Russian army has a huge problem with the integration of information.
Yeah.
They cannot conduct centralized warfare, like centralized in terms of information.
And it's actually really funny.
They're not America. They're not the American war machine.
But it's funny because they have incredible data collection capabilities, but they have no way to actually centralize that information and use it.
I think the emphasis on the last century was on rockets overall, like as a technology, and they like, okay, we spent a lot on rockets, and they kind of let this air force is just a secondary thing for them. You see always videos like of 2 Sukhois 25s like bombs on positions and then move away, and just that's it. So I think when they plan this massive rocket strikes, they have like 100 rockets and it hits all over Ukraine and stuff. When they fly aircraft, it's like 2 or 3 aircraft at once, and it's like, okay, oh, we did our strike, we're proud of ourselves. Yeah. When America, if you watch Americans, they have like not 100 rockets, but 100 aircraft actually flying around. So I think this emphasis on war is a little bit different from the Russians. To the Americans.
But that's just
this is what the West is always don't understand. Like, what if you see like on how to come back to this money problem? Like the cruise missiles are so expensive and stuff. If you have like thousands in the stockpiles, you just don't use them because they're expensive. You at some point you need to use them, right? And they used it a lot on static positions. For example, at the beginning of the war, Ukraine tried to counterattack in Kherson. It was constantly interrupted by these rocket barrages, right? So they come in at main power, rockets shoot down. This couldn't be done by a plane because a plane would be just shot down on the spot at the beginning of the war. So I think like this... I think something the emphasis on aircraft is just so low by the Russians.
Something I noticed is that a plane can actually carry a super stupidly big payload, which a rocket can never do, or a cruise missile can never do. So, for example, like you want to bomb a bridge, you actually need an aircraft with a stupidly massive dumb bomb to actually wipe out a bridge. So, I think the air power is still relevant, especially for the Russians, but it's just that they can't deploy such a plane, deep into enemy territory to just bomb the bridge. So I think that might be the situation.
Yeah, you don't want the pilots to be captured,
Yeah, because what there was, I'm not sure if you all catch one of the sit rep. I was like, I saw one of this video. Then I realized that how I never thought about how heavy a bomb a plane can carry versus what an artillery can load or what a rocket can launch. It never came into my mind until I saw a video of the Russian doing the dumb bomb run. Then I was like, I never thought about it. I think it's the one at Sperne. They just dropped the parachute bombs.
Yeah.
So it's like, I was like, oh yeah, they can actually carry stupid amount of bombs, or just one massive bomb, and you can just wipe out the entire defended fortified position. So I think Air Force is relevant, but I just think that the Russians just use it differently.
It's also that if you have so many munitions on an aircraft and it gets shot down, you lose all of them in one go. So,
but again, let's go to the point. For the Russians, this should be a political war, not a war to annihilate the population.
Right.
So
right, dumb bombs are a detriment. They kill civilians, and they don't want to do that. That's factor one. Right.
And they create a lot of rubble, so the Russians need to capture the stuff, and the rubbish is just stopping the advance. I think that was the point in Mariupol, right? So if they bomb Azovstal to smithereens, they can't actually capture it because there's so much.
That's what you can look at Bakhmut right now, right? You're seeing the photos come out in the last couple of days after these rains and after the snow. It's not a city anymore. It's a bunch of rocks. It's a bunch of rubble covered in mud, right? And now
That's Ukraine.
right, and you're seeing this ultimatum that expired now, right? You're seeing the same thing happen that happened in Azovstal, right? You're gonna see ultimatum. You're gonna see heavy artillery bombardment of literally everything within the city, and then you're gonna see advance, and then you're gonna see that repeated, and then you're gonna see coming out of Ukraine, the Russians are striking residential areas, civilian areas. There's no one there. No one can live there. It's literally just piles of rocks at this point. It's piles of concrete.
The problem is they lost that capability relatively early on.
Who did?
The Russians. They had an unbelievable amount of artillery guns and ammunition just firing away at the Ukrainians. That was when we saw basically the second stage of the war. They had an unbelievable advantage in that regard, and they leveraged that to the maximum. They basically sent a part of their scouting force forward, and when they were shot at, they ran away and flattened everything in a kilometer radius.
Yep.
And with Himars, they lost that capabilities, because to flatten everything in a kilometer radius, you need a heck of a lot of ammunition. And you have to transport that and store that. And we have seen in months upon months just how much Himars loves those ammunition storages. And we have seen in the heat maps of these fire satellite things, I think it was basically satellites that normally try to find forest fires, and we could see the reduction of fires in Donbass with the arrival of Himars, because the Russians just ran out of ammunition. So they lost this capability to just bomb everything to rubble with their artillery relatively early on.
I would wager to say that those satellites, those fire satellites, I remember, Wyatt, you actually used those a long time ago, about 5 months ago. They're not accurate. They're completely inaccurate. They measure everything from wildfires to artillery fire to someone running a wood stove or several wood stoves in the neighborhood. The fire heat tracking satellites are not a reliable source of information. And to say that the Russians have run out or run low on ammunition, or even
No, that's not what I'm saying at all.
Okay.
No.
I'm saying they have problems of getting their ammunition to the guns they need to fire them, so they have to reduce the amount of ammunition they fire because they can't logistically handle the amount of ammunition needed to support their earlier firing spree.
I would say for the time being, yes. I would say for the time being, yes, because of one, of the weapons provided by the West, two, because of the weather. We can't move anything right now. Everything is slowed to a essential grinding halt. And that's not something...
One question to all of you. Do you think that Russians could not destroy all the Himars in a few hours?
I think putting emphasis on the Himars weapon system is a poor strategic idea, because it's
if they were a big problem, that like it's advertised.
That's my point I'm trying to make. That's the point I'm trying to make. It's not a wonder weapon. It's not going to strike laser precision strikes on every square inch of the Russian line. Russia has comparable weapons.
The Himars system, just so we're clear, right? That is an anti-air platform, as far as NATO.
It's a rocket artillery system.
No. If you go and if you read the doctrine of why Himars was adopted and why they went to Himars and away from the MLRS, they went to far fewer rocket capabilities, and that long range, the Himars is actually part of their air doctrine. It was developed as anti-air. The other thing is this: Sebastian made a good point before about the munitions. There's a big difference between laser-guided artillery rounds and dumb rounds. And I think Sebastian might be right about the inability of the Russians to keep up logistical supply of their guided artillery rounds, which are deadly accurate. And also, we've got to understand there's a technological gap between NATO and Russia when it comes to targeting laser-guided and GPS-guided munitions. The two things are not the same. America used laser-guided weapons, which were called smart bombs in Iraq, and they're not effective when there's cloud cover. They're not effective when you can't get laser spotting and painting on your target. GPS-guided munitions use satellite thermal cameras, and they have handoff, and they are amazingly effective. And the Russians don't really have that technology yet. So I think Sebastian might be actually onto something in terms of the Russians' inability to keep up the supply of their smart munitions, of their laser-guided. I think they're called Krasnopol artillery rounds.
Yeah.
Yeah,
but that's the point I was trying to make about Himars, right? This is not a weapon system that Russia has no answer for. Not only can they target the Himars weapons after they're fired, Russia has a comparable weapon system to the Himars, and that's the Uragan rocket launch system. It's functionally identical. The only difference being is it doesn't have the integrated radar built into the rocket. It has to be guided
by drones, right? I think by drones.
By drones. Yeah.
Well, an important factor here is the surveillance and the guidance, right? Like one of the observations made constantly by people who think about the big, ugly strategic scenario is that this isn't like a full NATO versus Russia war, because in the first 10 minutes of a NATO versus Russia war, the satellites will be gone. And that is when your fighters have their real use, and that's when your supply chains for ammo can be overt over the railways rather than covert and only running at about a third the speed, because you have to disguise them.
Going down, then the nukes start flying. Let's be real.
No, I wouldn't say.
No, I don't think so. I don't think those are connected. I think you can actually knock down a lot of satellite assets before you head to the nuclear scenario.
You can take that to the next step. You can take that to the next step.
No slippery slopes here. I'm not talking about nuclear war. I'm talking about slippery slopes.
That's not what I'm saying. You can take that to the next step, though. Satellites go down. Next thing's next. Russia's primary military objective is to keep themselves from getting swarmed by NATO. And they've been prepping for this for the last 80 years. Yeah. And they've been prepping this with rocket weapons. They have every single major point of travel to Russia targeted for months ahead of time. The moment this conflict starts, every major artery road in Europe is going to be destroyed. Every single junction, every bridge, every dam, every bridge, water bridge, and land bridge is just going to
same will happen to Russia.
No, absolutely. But that's what I'm saying. We have not seen this. This is not a war yet. This is a conflict in Ukraine.
Agreed, but I'm trying to answer Toby's question, which is why haven't we seen the air assets? And the answer is your answer, which is they're kept in reserve for that really bad conventional scenario. They're going to absolutely need the fighters to do that, and they don't need them absolutely to do what they're doing in Ukraine, and they have other risks like dumb bombs killing too many civilians. So that's my answer to Toby's question, is they're in the strategic reserves with the rockets, with the dumb bombs, and with the Tu-95s, and with the torpedoes and the subs. So, Alan, I'm with you there that they have an entirely different war plan and war arsenal ready to go in case this gets too big.
Also, the doctrine of the Russian Air Force is the air superiority. So not a strike air force like the American.
Yeah.
And
so then you don't use it until you are ready for everything, right?
Also think about this, that if the NATO wants to deploy cruise missiles, they have two options, like from a ship or from an aircraft. And Russia should have the aircraft to intercept the American aircraft that carry the cruise missiles.
Yeah.
Do you need aircraft?
Main role of fighters is interception.
Yeah.
So you need this if you're going to do this preemptively, like above your like beyond your borders.
Yeah.
Mhm.
In Finland, in the in the north part, or I don't know, in the vast areas of Russia, they need to cover these areas.
Well, my question is, would you need aircraft to shoot down cruise missiles, or could that not be done with?
Aircraft to shut down the aircraft that carry the cruise missiles.
Okay.
Shoot down the bombers.
It can be massive distances for the cruise missiles to go. So the Americans will need, like in some cases, aircraft to carry them, to bring them close,
I understand.
and then to release the weapons.
Yeah.
I think that if the Americans decided to go to war using even a moderate amount of their conventional strength, Russia would very, very quickly be pushed into like the terrible calculus of nuclear deterrence. And
I agree on you.
I agree.
That's a diabolical situation. So I think that NATO is very sensibly exercising some restraint here, because really, the irony in all this is no one can afford Russia to lose this war, right? Nobody wants that. Nobody wants the Russians to get desperate.
I told you, it's about reducing the prestige of Russia. That's the American goal, the goal of the American government, because we have, of course, the American companies that make a lot of money, but that's another kind of discussion. But from the government, what they need? They don't need Russia to be a prestigious country, and one by one to take over countries to their side. What will happen to Turkey if the Russians win this war? Turkey will go with the Russia. What will happen with Hungary? They will go with Russia. It's like one by one they fail. Bulgaria, but they are also Orthodox. Perhaps Romania or even Greece, Cyprus,
Well,
Israel.
Take it all the way. The EU is not going to exist. The EU will fracture.
Yes, and
I think it's
already
the threat of self-destruction of the EU.
Sebastian,
You
what's the
cannot
German
have
position on the cost of energy? Like if German industry relies on competitive priced energy, how does Germany look if they're paying 3 times as much for LNG imports instead of Russian gas? Like, is this a deal breaker for Germany? Are we going to see Germany break the EU just because of economic necessity?
I don't think so. No.
Okay.
The Germans basically got the choice. You can either have all the energy you want and have all the industry you want and have the place in the world you have right now, but you have to abandon the Western sentiment, you have to abandon the Western world and be neutral, or you can try to put up with higher prices, higher energy prices, and reduction in industrial output. Probably, we don't know that yet, but be part of the Western world. And as far as we know, Germany choose the latter. And what I wanted to put forward to your question about the Russians are not being allowed to lose. Well, look at it this way. The Americans have incredibly deep pockets in strategically reserve, in their, I'm sorry, the word is strategic reserves depots, I think. Yeah. Basically, they have hundreds of thousands of guns, artillery rounds, tanks just standing around Bradleys waiting to be basically trashed. If they really wanted to end this war now, they wouldn't just be sending 100 howitzers, they would be sending thousands. The reasons for that is very simple. They don't want Russia to lose too hard, too quickly, because then the only options the Russians have are nukes, and nobody wants
I think
that.
that's right. Yeah.
I would
Ukraine is basically.
Who will operate these weapons? The 1 million army strong of Ukraine.
Who operates Himars in Ukraine right now? Who's using Himars in Ukraine?
I'm not saying about the technology. I'm saying about the massiveness of the equipment.
Oh, my bad.
Do you think that a million army strong is capable of winning Russia? Because I'm not.
Well, that's the
because
weird thing about the
because
Ukraine
even
war. Like, what do you-
even
what?
Estonia
Actually,
can master
Moscow.
1 million army strong.
I don't get
Toby,
it.
No,
Toby,
but
you
Russia
cut
is
out.
at the
Toby, you
moment
cut out when
very
you were
much
reading
unwilling
At the moment,
to leverage its
moment.
absolute population. It has one round of mobilization, and until that changes, they have manpower parity. When that changes, that's a completely new situation. But right now, Russia is unwilling, maybe politically, maybe it just organizationally incapable, I don't know. But at the moment, it is unwilling to leverage its entire population for whatever reason. And until that changes, the Ukrainians have a decent chance of matching the Russian army 1-to-1. And in that case, advanced weaponry is a force multiplier capable of beating the Russian army. Yes, I stand by
But
that
the
point.
Ukrainians are
Sorry,
going to
I'm
be
not
worn out long.
referring to the technology. I'm referring to the numbers of the equipment, because you said about the numbers that Americans can provide. And I said that a million army strong cannot win this war, because if they get
Yeah,
these
but what
weapons,
Sebastian
or
is saying is that it can if
the Russians will
win.
extend the conscription, and that's it.
Well,
Yeah,
that's
but
what
they
Sebastian
haven't,
is
though.
saying. They haven't. And Sebastian's making a strong point here, right? The reality is that the UK is training the Ukrainians very fast and very well and in large
50,000
numbers.
at one point, I think.
Right, exactly. And Sebastian's point is well made. At the current levels of mobilization, which is, he stressed this point, and it's true. At the current levels of mobilization, they're only matching the Ukrainian army. And if the Ukrainian army is being trained on NATO weapons platforms, then Russia has a problem. Because as he says, NATO has
They already have problems, but their numbers are not strong enough to win Russia.
No.
What do you
No.
think? What
George,
if
I
you were
think
in Putin's
what they're
position?
saying currently,
will you
as
make
of right now,
will you conscript 10 million people? No, you just accumulate with the situation. They muster 300,000 new conscripts.
So what is the Ukrainian war aim? This is like a genuine mystery to me. Like they can't talk in Moscow, right? What are they just going to fight until they're all dead? Like what is the Ukrainian position?
There is no Ukrainian position.
Ukrainian
There's a NATO
position.
position. It's a NATO position. It's an American position.
But what is it? Because it
They
seems
don't
like
even have a position.
we're going to fight till the last Ukrainian. I mean, that's like a meme, but it's also darkly true, right?
To the last Ukrainian. What are you
Guys on the
talking
front
about?
line, the Ukrainian front line, they're like, we're here because we're here because we're here. What are we doing? What's the end
I
goal?
said from the beginning, Ukraine conducted a massive conscription, a general conscription, and they mustered a million conscripts. A country that had 45 million people managed to muster 2% of the population, if I'm wrong. 2%, just 2%. 2% of the population, only 2%. When
But isn't the
I mean,
current
so
population
do you
about
understand
24?
that the majority of the people do not support this war? The Ukrainians do not support this war.
it's also about war
As
is
I
extremely
said,
expensive.
As I said, even if Estonia says that we will make a general mobilization in few months, they will muster a million army.
But what will they arm them with? Stones? Because it's modern
I'm
war.
not.
This is the main difference between
That's another situation. I'm just saying that about the war support. The war support in Ukraine. It's low.
That's
It's,
true. But even if you have 15 million, they all would want weapons. So if you remember a few months ago, we got so many videos that we're not getting equipment. Nobody's really given anything to us. They've just sent us. That was happening with the territorial army. Because you didn't have equipment to actually man all of these people. You could send them to a trench to lie down, but the artillery shells are hitting everybody. So you might
agree
actually
with
be
you.
better
I
off
agree
with
with
lesser
you.
people on the field to die.
I agree with you, but it's about the the intention of the Ukrainian people. They don't have the intention to go and fight. That's what I'm saying.
They give
you don't have volunteers.
Possibly.
Well,
In the beginning of the war, people were making Molotovs, going into the first, basically either street or forest they could find to hunt Russians. If that isn't volunteering to fight, I do not know what you're trying to fight in the
But there is a difference between
it was more
fighting in the first week versus now.
It was hyperbole. It wasn't quite that hard.
It was more of a TikTok challenge than an actual thing. Come on.
It's much easier to fight in
Granny's
urban
taking
situations.
Molotovs.
I mean, it's really easy.
War support is for a 20-year-old guy to go and say, I will go and I will fight for Ukraine or any other country, whatever. That's war support. It's about the males. It's about the males going and take up the weapons.
Okay.
Not about women making selfies and posting them on Twitter or UN pages on Instagram. Come on.
So there is a difference between conducting a active offensive in which you have to go across fields in positions you really don't know anything about and neutralize the enemy by digging them out. The Russians, when they invaded, you could actually sit in your prepared defensive positions. The Russians didn't really know. Every person could be an enemy combatant, and it often turned out to be. And so it was actually quite effective. And then morale was on your side, because once you saw a few knocked out Russian tanks, the media is on your side. It's great. But now 10 months in, and let's say 1 year from now, who knows, this war is going to continue. The morale will never be the same again, because you're not fighting in entrenched defensive positions that you built over 8 years. Those positions are gone. Or if let's say the Russian army does make another advance on Kyiv, then possibly we might have that kind of urban street battle. But the Russians would this time be knowing exactly what they're going into. And they would probably use a lot of those American tactics to be able to take the cities. City fighting, if you look at anything in history, has always been really, really bad. If the people want to fight in cities, like Kherson, there was no actual fighting. That's why it was fine.
You need 10 times. The attacker needs 10 times the amount of the defenders.
Now. We're talking about each particular, and if anybody's has any military experience, you would know that we are basically going to be coordinating across this street and this factory. And in Stalingrad, if we look at the battles, they were actually across particular buildings, which were really contested. And we are talking thousands of people dying across a few buildings. It is just not comparable to open field battle. And the Ukrainians just don't have the stomach for open field battle. It's quite easy to stand in your own city and say, yes, I'll fight the Russians, and they're just a kilometer from you. Go 200 kilometers in the freezing snow, and
they have been marching across
will churn after
Kharkiv and Lugansk recently.
So
the Ukrainians have been actually remarkably mobile, I would have thought. I didn't expect them to push as far as they did in Kharkiv and Lugansk.
But they weren't really manned positions. So I was surprised as well. But really, if you look at the Russian deployment, they didn't really have troops there. They surprisingly hadn't even dug in, which is, I don't even understand what Russian military doctrine is, but they didn't really dig in and entrench those positions to protect them. It was almost as if they were waiting for the Ukrainians to just take this all away.
Well, it's a Russian fighting style. You lose for a while and then you win. They've been doing that for hundreds of years.
But you need the numbers.
That's a way to
put it. They don't have the numbers.
Right, the Russians lose heaps of men.
They call it a Mongolian retreat.
A lot of vodka, and then they smash the fuck out of you.
Mongol tactics.
Yeah.
How they do?
As I see it, I think that they will use the conscripts to cover their position in the Donbas. They will try to make a big encirclement.
I think it's going to be an economic battle, really.
Or in conjunction with that, like I can imagine Ukrainian people protesting, like so they will want to go and sit in the table, but maybe their military will not permit this. They will not. There will be no ceasefire because, as I said, they are similar or the same people.
Look,
And
you can only live.
Exact
who are they
thing
fighting?
that
Who
landed
are
us in this situation.
Sorry?
This notion that the Ukrainian peoples are unwilling to fight a war is the exact notion that started all this. Russia thought they could come in, kick in the door, and the rotten building is going to crumble. It didn't. This notion that the Ukrainian people would protest and give up after a while, that's basically the opposite of that what we've seen.
Sebastian, I agree with you because you have to be dismissing 45 years of indoctrination with the Ukrainian people. These people have had 2 generations to start to just hate the guts of the Russians. It's not just, we have a new boss. Yeah,
the Ukrainians have been hating the Russians for 100 years, and the Jews. And they put the Russians and the Jews together to a large extent.
Well, that's what I'm trying to get at, right? To say that Ukraine's morale is slowly whittling away is sure. Some people's might, right? Some Ukrainians might be like, all right, I've had enough. But there is going to always be that extremely nationalistic core of Ukrainians who are like, nope, I will kill everyone if it means I get another couple days to stand and fight.
Only if they have American weapons.
They saw it in Vietnam.
Take their American weapons away, I don't think they're going to have much morale.
Yeah, I'm not sure. The history of war tends to be the history of people fighting really, really hard till the bitter end.
Both sides, though, Toby. Both sides, including the people in the Donbass. And I
do agree. If Ukraine gets,
they're not going to give up either.
If Ukraine gets all the support cut off, then I think they fold, right? Because they've got to eat, right? That's true enough. I don't see Europe. I don't see Europe saying, you know what, we're going to sacrifice all these people, because Europe can afford, and NATO can afford. Sebastian's point is well made. NATO has the stockpiles of weapons. It's not going to hurt NATO economically. The thing that hurts NATO economically is the price of energy and their debt, but that was there anyway. The NATO can support the Ukrainians for as long as the Ukrainians want to fight, and the Ukrainians will fight for as long as they want to fight. And
they have to maintain their own military capability, NATO, right? And at some point, the Americans are going to insist that because we're going to be fighting with the Chinese, or we might be fighting with the Chinese, we need a certain amount of equipment. I don't see the NATO equipment. You look at the number of planes.
You are right.
See it in the American stockpile, the strategic stockpile.
Sebastian is
There's
right.
Tanks and infantry fighting vehicles that are basically unusable. And, well, they aren't unusable, but asking a US Marine to put his life on that thing is asking for a lot. Basically, that's the old stuff nobody wants to use. They have that around. They can give that to anyone. And that is not going to hurt the American army in any way, shape, or form.
It's hurting it
now.
comes
to that, if they have to use
listen to what the Pentagon is saying. The Pentagon is saying we haven't got enough weapons.
No, well, they always say that so they can say more. But I'll give you a concrete example of what Sebastian's talking about. He's absolutely right. Look, I don't know if you guys know what NASAM is, right? But NASAM is the NATO anti-air system. And NASAM has 3 generations. And currently, the modern generation is generation 3, right? Ukraine is being given generation 2. Generation 2 is plenty good. It's got Link 16 integration with satellite targeting. It's got handoff capabilities to use local visual target acquisition. So you can jam all the radar, it'll still work to a large degree. This is NASAM 2. Well, currently, every NATO country has got stockpiles of NASAM 2 missiles that they're never going to use, right? Because they're all adopting NASAM 3. And the military industrial complex in America is busy making NASAM 3 and selling it for big money to Lithuania, Australia, and everyone else. And so Sebastian is absolutely correct. There are vast stockpiles of what I would call second-generation NATO weapons, which are equivalent or better to first-generation Russian weapons, right? And they're just sitting there. And so I agree with Sebastian entirely. There is no end of the military
Toby, you're talking about NASA, which there are a limited number of launchers, if you like, a limited number. Yes, there may be the missiles, and you can make the missiles. Let's just talk about 155mm rounds.
Mm.
Are you saying there are enough? Because the Pentagon are saying they're not enough. They can't make enough. That they're going to make about 30,000 a year, and the Ukrainians are going to use them up in 2 or 3 weeks, as far as I can see.
Well,
So-
okay, let's look at it another way. America has functionally infinite strategic reserves. Okay,
Yes.
we do not have functionally infinite capability to transport it.
That is true.
Yes, you do.
No,
we
can't.
absolutely do not. To try to say that we have the ability to move large parts of our America's biggest issue is our logistics. We have the greatest technology this world has ever seen. We have zero logistical backup for what we are doing.
You have enough aircraft, cargo aircraft, to hold the entire Australian military.
The Australian
in one
military
go.
is 77 people and a tank.
2 tanks.
I think someone in this chat is going to be angry. No,
The point that you're not making
Alan.
is that
a
at some point
shit
the
ton
Pentagon
Alan.
are going to say no.
tons
And
if you want to.
They will use the
Alan.
merchant ships, and in our days, especially the container ships are huge, they are massive.
And
They
they're
are
incredibly
they
cheap if you want
they
to.
can carry up to 20,000 containers. That each container can take up to 20 tons.
And how
You
are they
make
going to
the
get them
math.
across Ukraine?
Yeah, that's the problem, right?
No, how are they going to
Because
get them to
Russia is playing at home,
That's,
right?
that's
We
that's why
small and
Alan, I have a
eligible.
question
They're
for
going to
you.
do it.
that's why the
NATO is
Americans
playing
built
away.
that's why the Americans built a coastal base in Greece in the recent years.
Sebastian,
massive
like,
hub.
I understand what
Alan.
you're
Get
trying
them
to
across
say.
Ukraine.
I understand what you're trying to say.
Alan.
Not to say the Americans are
Really?
going to do it. That's
Alan.
yeah. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry, my mic
And
might
about
be
the
a little bit.
transportation.
I had a question for you because I get the impression that the United States is under a lot of internal stresses, like a lot of homelessness and a lot of issues that are, can be solved with a few, like $10 billion here, $5 billion. But instead, like the Congress and so forth through the Pentagon and whatnot is sending like, what is it now, up to 100 billion or something. And so, like, I wonder if do you like notice an increasing shift in the sentiment over there that people are, yeah, sure, maybe we could send all the weapons, but like, why will we really care so much about the Ukrainians when we are having skyrocketing inflation and prices and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera?
Because
People
you're
in the
not
US are used
I
to be
will
more
answer
focused
this.
about the
It's
domestic
too
problems.
I have
easy
two answers for
answer
this.
to basically
And
destroying the Russian army.
So there's two answers to your question because there's two sides to this question. In my generation, I'm not gonna lie to you, a lot of the people between the ages of 18 and 30 have absolutely no idea and do not care or give half a care of the world of what is going on. As long as they have TikTok, as long as they have internet to browse their Instagram profiles, it's funny, but you have to think about it deeper than what I'm saying. People in my generation do not care. I have my girlfriend, I love her to death. Before she met me, she thought Russia was still a communist country, and a lot of her friends still did. There is zero care in our generation for what goes on outside of even the city you're in. There's the evil Republicans who want to kill all the women who are pregnant and want to force abortions. There's the Democrats, or there's the view of the Democrats. They're all Satan worshiping baby eaters, and then that's all there is. It's such a surface level analysis that people have that no one actually wants to look into it and read into it further. And that's not to play on my ego or anything. I'll be the first to say I have no idea what's going on. That's why I come here. I want to learn from you guys. But
So would you say that the Americans in general are so oblivious to the amount of money that goes to this conflict
Yes.
at the expense of their own that they don't
there's
even,
no
it doesn't even cross their
understanding.
mind?
No one knows the value of money anymore. Everyone hears, oh, we printed 65% of all the US dollars that have ever been printed in the last 2 years. And everyone goes, Okay,
Okay.
whatever. That's fine. As long
Yeah.
as I can still go to
Yeah.
Starbucks and get my coffee, I'm fine.
Yeah, anytime I try to talk geopolitics with some of my friends, they don't even know what I'm saying in the first
Yeah,
place.
but inflation, everyone knows what inflation is.
No,
That's
I wish.
Oh,
I
yes,
wish
they do. When
did.
they go and buy something and they what inflation
Yeah,
is.
they're starting to find out.
No, they're going to find out the hard way, but no one can actually conceptualize what.
No, forget about conceptualizing. People will eventually react to the fact that they can't buy things.
Yes.
And when they then say, why can't I buy something? And someone says, well, we've just sent another 50 billion to Ukraine. They're going to change their minds very quickly.
You're right.
That
And
they
that's
can
the two
understand.
things. And that's there's two groups. One is it's because Putin is evil and he's interfering with our government, and the other one is because we're screwing all our people over by sending money to Ukraine. There's the two sides I was trying to get at.
I think Alan's deeper point here, if I'm right, Alan, is that
please,
there's not enough pro-war sentiment in the US.
Correct.
Right? Like it's not that there's anti-war, it's not that there's pro-Russia sentiment. But if you get all the people in America who are willing to have a nuclear war over Ukraine, you could fit them in a minibus, right? Like the idea that the Americans are going to go and send a whole generation of young men to die in Ukraine is astounding fantasy to me. And I don't even know America that well. But I don't see it. I don't see.
I think they're happy enough just sending Ukrainians to die.
Toby, you raise a good point. There's another generation here which remembers the Vietnam War and remembers the protest against the Vietnam War. And that, remember, they're not all dead. You know, some of us are still alive, and we were involved in those protests. There was a very good reason why we didn't want to do that. We were told about the domino theory. Nowadays, we're told about the evil of, what do they call it, autocracies. It's democracy versus autocracy. Well, this generation has had that up to here because we saw hundreds of thousands of people die from the West because of that sort of philosophy. So it's not just the youngsters. And I understand what Alan's saying, but there are a lot of people who do remember and say, well, you know,
that's Vaun.
Yeah, I might be prepared to die for America, but I'm not going to die for Ukraine.
No, take it one step further. I'm prepared to die for my version of America. I'm not willing to die for the America that exists today.
But that's exactly.
Strictly speaking, we're supposed to kill for America, not die for America. Dying is not very useful.
Speaking of the versions and who will die, let's make a bit of statistics. As I said, like the Ukrainian, the Ukraine managed to conscript like around 2% of the population. Can somebody guess the percentage of the Ukrainian people that used to support the extremist parties like Svoboda and right sector? Around 4%? 4%, something like that?
I thought it was a quarter.
I think it was like
30
or something.
No.
3-0.
No. It was around 2 to 4%.
Damn.
Ukraine is not interested in politics.
Good point.
Like if anyone's interested in looking at the data, Ukrainians don't belong to political parties.
My point is that the guys who went as a conscripts were the fanatic elements of the Ukraine. Like not all of them, but a good portion of them. So, can we expect more people to go and
Georgios,
get conscripted?
what percentage of the Ukrainian population fought on the side of the Nazis in the Second World War?
Like less than 1%.
Less than 1%? How many of them were sympathetic to the Germans and were anti-Russian and anti-Jewish?
A lot of them.
If you put this question, even Russians in our days are sympathetic of them, especially before 2014. Don't forget, Russia was the country that had the most skinheads, the most Nazis, neo-Nazis in the world. Before 2014. After 2014, the government extinguished these elements.
Which government are you talking about?
Russian.
You're not talking about the Ukrainian government. They seem to have encouraged it. They were the ones that incorporated the Azov battalion into the Ukrainian army.
Well, you're at war.
Now, you need to look at a guy called Godolinsky that will talk to you about anti-Semitism in Ukraine
I think he's talking about Russia. Danny, he's talking
I'm
about Russia.
saying.
I don't care about Russia. That Russia is not the point. There are skinheads in the UK as well. What difference does that make? We are talking about how many Ukrainians are anti-Russian or anti-Jewish or both.
Being
And I'm not talking about doing a poll and asking someone.
But yeah, okay.
Are you anti-Russian? Are you
anti-Polish?
anti-Polish?
Okay. I can answer you with a different kind of answer. Most of the Orthodox Christians are anti-Semite. Most, but that doesn't mean that they will go and they will kill the Jewish people. It's just words.
Okay, what about Russians then? What about anti-Russians?
Well, I cannot answer this question clearly.
Okay, nobody can.
Okay,
but when Putin talks about Nazis, you've got to remember that there were more Russians died in the Second World War than there were Jews. About 4 times as many, depending on which calculation you want to take. Mm-hmm. And so for when Putin says Nazis, he's not worried about anti-Semitism. He's worried about anti-Russian people.
That's a sort of propaganda, of course. Because
no, I think it's true. There is some truth in it. Like Putin says, Russians have become the new Jews. It's okay to hate Russians. It's okay to call Russian children orcs. People do this on YouTube and they don't get flagged for ethnic hatred. He's got a point, right? You're allowed to hate Russian ethnicity. You're not allowed to hate anyone else, right?
Well, to be fair, it's also okay to hate Arabs or something like that.
That's also a madness of the West. That's a madness. Well, what can I say? What can I? Not just me, but also you. How we permit these things to happen?
Well, we don't. It just happens.
Look on Twitter. You see how the absolute
buy shares in Raytheon, my son, and join the winning team.
However, no one of us quitted all the Meta, Facebook, Instagram, etc. Nobody. And
well, I think it's going to be the end of Ukraine. I don't think the world accepts this nonsense and the ethnic hatred. And so it's not that everybody's going to sign up and become a Putin supporter. It's just that the support for Ukrainian nationalism, I think, it's a few guys who work for Sky News in the UK who are being paid to do it, right? And I think there's maybe 3 other window lickers who are waving their blue and white flags or blue and yellow because they don't know that there's a new thing around the corner. Ukraine is going to fade from like the entertainment spectacle of the West, and it'll be forgotten.
Of course, Ukraine was the new big brother, like a soul.
Coming back to the military thing.
That's pretty much the reason why Russia got nothing, right?
See, every 20 years we should have like a military soul or something.
The questions are, let's put questions, is to what extent are the American people prepared to see their wealth diminish in order that the Ukrainians might flourish?
Vaun, do you want to go first?
Secondly, how many Ukrainians are prepared to die in order that the Americans can see the Russian military diminished?
For the first question, I think it will go as it went in the Vietnam War. You will have protests, you will have everything, but in the end of the day, the government will take its own individual decisions.
Yeah.
Governments know how to make propaganda. They know how to cover up things.
When the chief of the general staff says that Ukraine cannot win, you know that it's on the decline.
Vaun, what's up?
Yeah, I was going to say, like, in relation to, are Americans really prepared for what's coming, if the war continues, and just even if the war was to end in the next few months for some amazing reason, the ripple effects in the economy worldwide are going to be felt, especially next year. I think in America, you've got people that pay attention and try to get ready, maybe get food and stuff and make plans to kind of ride out the rough times. And then there's a lot of people. Yeah, there's most people are completely clueless. There might be a few people here and there that maybe there's a bug in their ear or something in the back of their mind. It's almost like classes. There's going to be classes of survivors. There's going to be classes of just people that are going to be exploited, die, used, whatever, I mean, depends how bad it gets, but even if it was to stay the same economically, I mean, there are classes here. I mean, there's people that are better off because they pay attention and they're prepared, and there's people that, they're living paycheck to paycheck. They don't even know what they're going to eat tomorrow, stuff like that. Then you look at the homeless. I live in a major city. It's a blue city. It's pretty depressing, and you can see problems getting out of hand there. And if you look at bigger cities with even more like Los Angeles or New York, I mean, I can imagine how bad that could get. But, we keep getting because I listen to a lot of stuff. So, there's a lot of people talking about food shortages coming and issues with supplies and stuff like that. But like I said, there's people that pay attention like me and try to, do what I can. And then there's people that don't have a fucking clue and they got their face buried in the phone.
That's something I'd like to add to.
However,
I wanted to add something about the food and the energy. At least in the United States, we need to think about the long-term effects of what happened when this conflict escalated back in February, and every Western country said, "No, we don't want any more fertilizer from Russia and Belarus because you guys are the bad guys." This winter, the big problems are going to be in Europe because they're not going to have energy.
We have a cushion. We have a cushion right now.
Winter, we will not have enough fertilizer. Or I'm sorry, by next winter, we will not have enough fertilizer to have grown enough crops to even not only export, but begin to fill up our reserves. So next winter, we will begin consuming our reserves, and then by the end of next winter, we will have no reserves.
And the thing is
US has the money, has the assets to buy.
You can buy it if no one makes it. It doesn't matter if you can buy it.
It's about being the richest guy, because it's supply and demand, and the richest guy around is USA, right?
But look at the oil cap. That's not going to work.
When 2 billion
countries
people
will not take the grains.
Absolutely not. I fundamentally disagree, because next winter, when 2 billion people enter a famine and 500 million people are at risk for starvation throughout Africa and Central Asia, and as well as South America, money does not matter. When 500 million people are at risk of dying, it does not matter.
If they will throw some Africa, we're looking at 500,000 people starving next year. And everyone knows that.
You know how it works. In the West, they will just put some advertisements about with the UNICEF, etc., help some people. So we, the common people, will feel that our soul will be salvaged by donating a few dollars.
That's the problem.
It always
You're
works
right.
like that.
You're completely right. And I think you and I are looking at it a little bit differently. I'm kind of looking at it just as looking at it as the overall suffering of humanity is essentially bound to come. And you're trying to look at it how the West is going to deal with it. I guess I agree as to how your analysis goes.
I think the West is not going to American perspective. Let's take it as cold and as calculating as humanly possible.
Right.
The big three things: military,
I don't think
and
it's
energy.
so easy from the American
America
perspective.
is one of the biggest energy exporters in the world. They have shale and oil and gas for days. They are not going to have any problems with energy. They have one of the biggest continuous arable land in the world after the Russians and the Ukrainians. They are not going to have a problem with food either. They are food exporter. Jesus Christ, words are hard. And from a military perspective, this is going to be the easiest and cheapest opportunity the American taxpayer is ever gonna get to diminish the Russian military. They have the weapons, and in Europe as well, those weapons are produced for a war against Russia. Maybe it was produced as a war against the Soviets, but those weapons are there. And now you don't even have to pay the human component. because the human component is paid by the Ukrainians. This is the cheapest way to get a global, well, kind of global power, the Russians maybe might still qualify, out of the picture without having to pay any of the human cost. Because you just have to hand over the weapons you already have.
But they're not.
And all the other
I
factors you're
disagree
just
with
not going to care about.
That hamstrings
I just want to
yourself
make a
against
quick
China, though.
1 minute point in this. I think it's not economically as easy. True, the Americans have the resources. The Russians also have the resources. So it's really, but if you look at the economic side of things, why people say that Russia is a poor economy, it is. But the point is, it's because it's valued in US dollars. Now, if you look at what has happened, is India is now trading directly in Russian rubles. China is trading directly in Russian rubles. India was trading directly in Indian rupees with Iran a few years ago. And basically, these countries,
Don't forget the
especially
petro
Asia,
ruble and petro yuan.
they're shifting away from the US dollar as the primary. The reason the US is able to do this is because they have the currency which is extremely strong, which buys everything because it's so powerful. Even now we see the US dollar really rising because of Federal Reserve's actions. But this is going to end as the stock markets really collapse, as the housing market really collapses, then there's going to be actual literal problem in the voting public as well, because right now they don't care. But as soon as it actually starts hitting their bottom line, it starts hitting each person on the street.
As
Maybe
I
it will take
said,
1 to 2 years.
Sebastian is
It
assuming
will
that the
change things.
Americans are happy just to eat and survive. They're not. The American economy will have to export. People have to buy from Google, Facebook, all the others. They have to buy Americans. Otherwise, you're reducing the standard of living, Sebastian. It's not a question of whether you can eat and whether you can put petrol in your car. That's one thing. The majority of Americans, I'm not talking about the lowest class of Americans, the majority of Americans will still need to have that aspirational economic value. Otherwise, they're going to rebel. And they
but
rebel
to
quite
have
simply.
this,
They just say, no, we're not going to have you.
to have this, you should have a strong dollar, a dollar that the world trusts. If the world do not trust dollar, the US people will, the Americans will not be able to live in the way how you described.
Absolutely.
Because as I said, it's a matter of prestige. As long as the US has the prestige to show its military capabilities and economic capabilities in order to help any country that they want, they will not have problem. But
Captain.
if the dollar stops to become this kind of currency, then it will be over.
Captain, sorry for interjecting, but have you guys heard about the Saudi Arabians now opening up or not? Because one of the reasons the US dollar is so strong is because of the petrodollar. Over the course of this year, the Saudis have been opening up for the petro ruble and the petro yuan. So, as far as I've understood it, this is considered by many within the US power structure to be one of the biggest threats, because when you have on top of the inflation, which is really putting a dent into the trust of the dollar, they hit it with the lockdowns, and once the economy started moving again, of course, all this printed money started moving. Boom, the inflation catches up, and then let's blame supply chain issues and the Ukraine war. Of course, they exacerbated perhaps, but the real reason is, of course, the money printing, as I'm sure most of us know. And then, this can only hold because the US dollar is as strong as it is. But, in one way, can we all kind of sort of see that Russia, in one way, have won quite a big win with here, merely by being able to trade, to kind of get the Saudis away from the dollar. And, the Chinese by proxy would also, of course, benefit having, in that sense.
It's not only that. I will put a different perspective. I think that you guys know the World Trade Organization. So all the sanctions are illegal. Any sanction, not towards Russia, all the sanctions. So the day will come that the panels in the World Trade Organization will have to conclude, and they will say, look, guys in the West, what you have done is illegal, and you have to pay remedies to Russia.
They won't pay.
It's never going to
They
happen.
won't pay. If they won't pay, effectively, it means that the free trade will be over around the world.
And what does that
Well,
mean? Do you guys know the history of humanity? Do you know what happens
They'll say no and still try to do free trade. They'll try to have both. They'll figure out a way to do something forceful.
How can you have a free trade if you are in the risk of not?
They're going to tell you it's free trade.
Trade terms.
They're going to tell you it's
Well,
free
they're
trade.
also circumventing their own sanctions to a large degree. I mean, trade is still flowing.
The guns and the boats.
When empires fall and a unipolar world becomes a multipolar world, that's when you get the four horsemen of the apocalypse, guys. If the US Navy stays home, China starves in 3 months. If China starves in 3 months, Asia burns in 5. The world depends on the US Navy. The greatest threat to world peace is that the Americans lose their shit and decide to stay home. And that's just a hard fact. There's no such thing in the history of humanity of a unipolar power collapsing and everybody having a good time. The Chinese have got a green water navy. The US Navy stays home. There are 7 different regional navies that will contest their waters. Now, everyone else will call it piracy, but every navy will call it sovereignty, right? You get globalization, you get trade when one power dominates the waves and sets the rules. Praying for the US to stay home and collapse is praying for unbelievable calamity across the world. So you got to be careful what you wonder about.
This is something that I always say as well. You know, you don't really want US to collapse. No, like this, which is why I'm very worried when Biden become president.
Who's going to buy the Chinese stuff?
Think about geopolitics as the antitrust laws, the American competition law. You don't want to have one company or 2 companies. You want to have plenty companies to compete based on merits. However, if you apply this to geopolitics in our days, you are not sure. No, it's not only about that, but the big factor in our days is that if you have a lot of strong countries, you may have a strong country that has nuclear weapons, but this country doesn't have, let's say, the responsibility, the ethical responsibility. So when you described about the conflicts, that also means nuclear wars. That's what I think. And in conclusion, I think that you are right. Like the US, for me, is a necessary bud.
People forget that the business of the US is business, and that the US, after the Second World War, made it so that everyone could do business. Look at Japan, look at Germany. People are praying for the end of the US because they think there's going to be some salvation in that. The only people who are going to benefit from that are the American people.
The US has been struggling recently to put sanctions on everyone. So I'm not too sure I can agree with that, Toby. China is managing quite nicely. I mean, people are panicking, saying there's only 3.6% growth in China, and yet it's the second largest economy in the world. And there's growth in India. And they've just announced the Turkic alliance, right? In November 22, there was a meeting of the Turkic alliance. That's 170 odd million people. Okay, it's only about united together. It's about the 12th economy in the world. But a multipolar economy, world economy, may have to function Because if the
How?
US keeps applying sanctions, it's going to disappear up its own arsehole, as we say in England.
How is anyone going to send any ships anywhere when every navy can stop them and exercise their sovereignty at any given point? That's not how globalism works.
China has quite a large navy.
Globalism wouldn't work.
India has quite a large navy.
So I don't think globalism has to work, because the world has existed without globalization for the last 2,000-3,000 years. We've
And
only had
people
the last
died
100
at
years.
dirty war
What is it?
without globalism.
I mean,
Most
I
of the
think
stuff
globalism is
doesn't
dead
work.
already. I mean, it's
A lot of
dying.
people are getting a free ride on the back of America right now, and that's
going to end because America no
yeah,
longer has a
if the
stomach to be able
petrodollar
to fund
falls
that
over,
kind of
it's going to
navy.
be a disaster for everybody. No question.
I think, Toby,
we'll
you're a
have to be
little bit
more
late
optimistic
in the
than that.
game, because since 2014, Russia has been organizing itself to and China has as well, to do without SWIFT. Once they do without SWIFT, it's the other way around. The majority of the world has isolated the US. Now, I agree that's not very good for international trade, but the US have brought it on themselves. You cannot keep sanctioning everyone, because everyone will eventually react. And who's going to buy US products?
Right, and we have regional
US,
trade. We have
they
bilateral
will
agreements.
not have just a survival.
Vaun, you got to just start talking.
Yeah, what do the Americans think about this? Because we're all talking about America.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, a lot of what you're saying is true, but you have to apply it to the current administration or people like the current administration and a lot of the players that have been in the American government for the last 30 years. I mean, they're obviously not smart enough to do what you're talking about and exploit these situations and not have these stupid conflicts pop up when they could literally just go in and undercut markets and flood the markets with their own resources and influence the world that way. I mean, the problem is we have bad government with, like all these resources. You're saying, oh, America could just survive on its own. Yeah, we could survive on our own. We got all the oil we want. We don't have a shit for a manufacturing base. We're not building refineries. We're not pumping oil. We can do all that, but the problem is we're going to have to fucking hit rock bottom first and suffer before somebody gets put into power that's going to be like, fuck you, we're drilling oil, we're building factories, we're building refineries, we're building ships. I mean, and even if that was to happen with this past election, and if it had gone better than you thought, or if the next election goes awesome, you're still talking about a decade or more just to get all that shit up and running. And the way America's politics work is, Trump could get in there and we could be going forward with all this building and developing and getting our resources. Then the next fucker comes in and shuts everything down. So you stop and goes 2 steps forward, 5 steps back. I mean, that's the problem with American politics. You look at China or Russia, they have one leader who does the plan, and when he's gone, the next leader comes in and does the plan, and the next guy. They don't have fucking parties. Yeah, they do have parties, but I just, they have long-term visions and long-term goals, and we don't.
That's what the rich people know. Do you know that? Because
it's
about the
Indonesia,
stock market.
it's Malaysia. There's a shed load of countries out there which are big, huge populations. The whole West only contains 1.2 billion people, but there's 8. So there's 6.8 billion people. And again, you can't count, as Mr. Choudhry said, you cannot count it. You've got to look at it in purchasing power parity. The Russians are not poor. Go and have a look at their supermarkets. They are not poor. They're full of products. The people
their
do
supermarkets
really well.
look better than some of the ones I see in America. Just depends
they
where
can
you're
exist
at.
in the east of Russia. They can exist on $500 or $600 a month quite comfortably. You cannot make those
in
comparisons.
America, people are not going to be used to the change in their living standard
Absolutely.
if it's that abrupt. I mean, some people will adapt. A lot of people won't.
Yeah, and here's something you got to add to that. We talked about the American government, like, oh, this administration, that administration. Look at it in a bigger picture. We can sit here and we can discuss in this panel all these things that America could do, should do, will do, etc. Government is government. It's run by people. People are stupid to one extent or another, right?
I agree.
Look, there was a recent news article about some Pentagon analyst who was like the senior analyst on American-Russian relations, and it was like some 23-year-old guy who went to, I don't know, freaking Longwood University, some random university, and he got the job because he was recommended by his dad or by his uncle or something. That's a separate conversation. But to assume that the American system runs efficiently and knows what it's doing and knows what it needs to do is a really big jump in logic that we shouldn't be making.
I'd like to put a comment on that and tell that
I'm going to go. I'm going to go and watch the football, I'm afraid. So thanks a lot, Wyatt. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Danny.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. And maybe Danny will come back in the third time.
I think the problem in our days is that we have a lot of educated people that they are educated only from the one perspective. Let's say the economics, solely on economics, or
gender studies,
from the law or war studies. So they don't have a general idea how to combine all those elements and make the right conclusions. If you remember, before the start of the military operation in Ukraine, in the West, they said, "Oh, the Russian economy can only stand for a month or something like that." Everyone was telling that, all the specialists. But it seems like that they had no problem at all. Why?
Look, according to the Pentagon, Russia ran out of missiles in March, June, July, August, September, October, and now they also ran out of missiles last week. So,
yeah, we just don't know the actual amount of missiles Russia has. We just don't know. Well,
I saw a video the other day where they were loading 125 millimeter shells into a T-80, and I'm pretty sure the date on the shells was November of 1973. So I'm pretty sure they're not going to run out. I mean, you think about it, the 125 millimeter gun is the same gun on the T-62 all the way up to the 80. So you can't think that how many rounds of 125 have they been making since the gun came online? Every year for 50 years of a Cold War? I mean, I'm thinking hundreds of thousands of rounds a year.
And what about the fact that China is supporting them and China is the world's manufacturing base?
Yeah.
And China wants their oil. So, like, this idea that Russia is going to be, like, harmed economically when they've got China that's weird. That's weird.
Toby, but as I said, it's a matter of prestige. I don't think that Russians need to get supplied from the Chinese because they will look to be weak. So I think that Russians already made their,
and that's assuming that China doesn't stab Russia in the back.
I think a lot
for
of
Russia, the biggest threat is China. Like, objectively, they have an enormous population. Where these people will live? China needs land, and Russia has a lot of land to offer to.
I think a lot of these countries are looking to get their equipment out of the battlefield tested.
Russia is very lucky that nuclear weapons exist. Without nuclear weapons, Russia will be over already.
Without nuclear weapons, China will have colonized everything from the Pacific Ocean to the Ural Mountains.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
That's simply what would have happened. That's probably what's going to happen in the next 20 years.
Yeah, don't forget, not gonna lie,
dragon.
Russia has like
this scenario also brought me to the conclusion that in this war in Ukraine, Russia tried to lure China to go with war in Taiwan, because if that happens, it means that the most probable thing is that China will be sanctioned. And if China will get sanctioned, it means that this growth of the Chinese economy will not only stop, but it will create huge problems, because their existence is based upon producing things for other countries. Effectively, like the China will have revolutions. They will most probably they will face self-destruction. and that's on the interests of Russia. Objectively, they don't want China.
They need Russia to go back into a warring states period, as they did back in the 1500s and the
Exactly.
1000s AD and the 500s.
And I'm start to think that Russia is trying to keep the tension up in order to create a situation in Taiwan where the China will be harmed. I know it's like a sci-fi scenario, but I don't know. That's how I see it, because there are a lot of irrational things happening.
There's also those things. There's also those 1.5 billion things we can't predict that can happen. You know, so or even imagine that. Not even predict. There's so many things that could happen in the next year that no one even imagined could happen. It would break everything, and we'd have to start over from.
And as you said, there are a lot of dumb people in a position of strength, and we are not. We don't know if these people will achieve their goals. Personally, when I see that, when I saw that Liz Truss became the president of UK, the Prime Minister, I was so afraid. I said, "Oh,
Dude,
this is very bad."
She made it what, like 40-something days?
Yeah, I think 43. The lettuce lasted longer.
Yep.
But I heard that she will get pension for the rest of her life, right?
Yeah.
She beat the guy who died in office.
Good. She's so smart.
You know, Thatcher was a decent woman, but this imitation called Liz Truss, it's not Thatcher.
Well, you got to look back at people like her and Reagan. I mean, whether you like them or not, those were serious people that knew history and, you know, understood things and grew up in different times. I mean, we don't have the people filling those shoes now are, for the most part,
dang it.
Absolutely, I agree. Wholeheartedly.
I totally agree.
People are.
Vaughn, you cut out, man. Maybe he disconnected.
Yeah, I think he's gone.
Dang it.
Yeah,
going up. God.
The suspense is killing me.
Yeah.
Please allow me to ask a question, Jen, for you all until on your streams. What do you think is the general strategy for both Russia and NATO, respectively? Like, for me, it's like for Russia, it seems to be just letting NATO and the EU collapse and then take it from there. Kind of, they seem to be taking it like a little bit piecemeal, but generally just like this is attritional warfare, and we're not in a rush here or anything. Whereas NATO has like, let's see, how can we make more money on arms shipment or something? It doesn't seem like they have anything like a coherent plan whatsoever. So like, I was curious, like, do any one of you think that there is actually like an end plan, an end game? Because negotiation.
There is a goal, and the goal is kill the bad guy and live forever.
Right, so keep the conflict forever, maybe.
You'd be surprised.
I think from the Russian perspective,
I've heard Ukraine being referred to the new Afghanistan, so I was kind of like, do you guys think that because it doesn't seem like either side is too keen on actually concluding the war, so it's definitely likelihood that the war can continue more or less endlessly.
I don't think Russia,
does
want this to end. That's why you're seeing such like if Russia wasn't keen on ending this war, right? Yes, Russia hasn't gone all in. They haven't gone tanks, missiles, planes, nukes. They haven't done all that. I'll admit that. But you wouldn't see such heavy fighting from Mariupol. You wouldn't see men killing each other in the mud in Artyomovsk, Bakhmut, as brutally as they are, sending forces as much as they can to the city. You wouldn't see fighting and pushing through Svetova, which is the northern part of the line. Like, if Russia didn't want this to end, they could easily just stagnate the line. They could just send enough troops to hold it and then be done with it. That's not what they're doing. They're advancing in multiple different places across the line, simultaneously committing this more partial mobilization, and then sending these people into places that.
But doesn't that kind of again explain like as a seeming strategy for the Russians to be having currently? It's attrition. Like, yeah, sure, they might be going in for like a more massive attack and so forth later on, but they seem to like take this iteratively, and like at the time being, they like, okay, yeah, sure, we can mobilize, we could send in troops, we could advance, and we could hold the Kherson line and so forth, we could retake Kharkiv. But they don't really have to. They can see, like, let's just see if the EU is actually going to be willing to send any more weapons. If the US is going to start changing their mind or something, by the end of the winter, a lot of things can have happened, and then they may conclude, okay, well, spring is happening, and this is a common time, the best time of year usually to commence an offensive, which is kind of probably why they did it.
For Russia, that would be
I
winter.
think
the Russians.
Sorry, guys, do you know what's the military strategy of Russia? How is it called, and briefly what it is?
Matryoshka.
That's
It's
defense.
called it's called next generation warfare, and basically it's a form of hybrid warfare, but by utilizing everything, not just psychology, all aspects, everything that you can use. So even from their military strategy, we can understand that Russians are not basically fighting on the field; they are fighting everywhere. So it's like a standard to assume that the economy, the prolonged war, everything is something
They
that
seem seemingly more prepared.
according to their plan. It's not.
But they haven't fully
it's not
utilized
something
that.
that it randomly happened. They calculated this domino. This is their
Oh,
strategy.
sure. The Russians, this is my point. The Russians seem to actually have that. Whereas the West doesn't actually seem to have like anything more than, let's say, when can we send the next arms shipment? And that's pretty much it. Like, they don't seem to have any if this then that. It's sort of all hypothetical, typically hyped up in the media about nukes and stuff like that. But the Russians, they have kind of already had a partial victory. They have a foothold. They have kind of a strategic advantage in that sense that they don't really have to commit. They are at the first mobilization since the right? The Ukrainians are on their 6th or 7th, right? And the Ukrainians are the one who have the least. They are the weaker part. They are not really the one who should be able to afford a war of attrition while being on the defensive. But here they are, clearly they must have had some much higher casualties than the Russians.
The Russians are trying to conserve their resources. So the Russians are short of resources quite clearly. They only had 350,000 strong army, really. You might be able to add all the reservists, but you will not be able to maintain so many people on the field. War is extremely expensive. So the Russians are trying to finish this war. So they're hoping 300,000 to 500,000 people would do it and they would end it. But if it doesn't, they will go to the next field. But if they really went in, let's mobilize 1 million men, let's mobilize 2 million, they can. But they won't be able to maintain that for a long time. And so they're trying to use this attrition against the West as well.
That's why you saw this mobilization start, right? It's knocking the dust off of the machine, off of the logistical machine, because if you start your mobilization with 300,000, 350,000 people, and then it escalates, then NATO has to get involved, then that's when you're going to start seeing Russia slowly but surely build up this logistical machine that they've got packed away. Now, again, but you were right, Art. You were right.
I was going to say, actually, a few months before the mobilization, there was some legislation they passed in Russia that I guess ordered their civilian industry to start gearing up towards war production, like producing equipment, I guess, basically. I'm thinking mostly like uniforms and kit like that. But, they've already got on that footing to some degree. Like you were saying, they're not going to go out there and mobilize a bunch of guys and not have anything for them. So they probably got that stuff going, and then as it came online, they started mobilizing, and then they just went ahead and announced it once they had everything figured out. I mean, obviously they didn't have it perfect because there's videos of guys bitching about not having gear, but, out of how many people got mobilized, how many videos have you seen that are different people? What, 20? So maybe 20 times 30 guys out of 20.
But this logistical problem, because if you produce the uniforms in Siberia, they need some days to arrive in I don't know.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
That's why they're doing it now.
Doing that for a few months.
Yeah, that's why they're doing it now, so that in the future they don't have to start doing it. They'll just have them there where they need it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I
but
was
if
about
you
to
look at
say
the
that Iran is giving their like ballistic missiles to Russia. It's going to be like, I think they're going to start using it around like December maybe, because they've been giving
I didn't hear about that.
no, ballistic missiles. They showed in the news like 2 weeks ago.
But this doesn't essentially means that Russia is in need of these missiles. Perhaps
Yeah, I think a lot of countries.
it's a
I think a lot
gift.
of
Think about it. It can be a gift to Iran to test these weapons.
yeah, exactly. Why wouldn't you test
Maybe
your
they need them.
drones
Maybe
against
they
American
know.
tech? Why wouldn't you test your weapons against Western technology if you could for free, with no cost to you? Your drone gets shot down in Ukraine. Oh well, you know it works or not. Your missile gets shot down. You know it works or not. No cost to Iran to test a missile in Ukraine.
One step even better for Iran. They have the Shahed drone. They sold the plan, or not sold. They just gave the plans to Russia so Russia could make their own. Russia makes the exact copy of what Iran has. Iran has spent zero money. Russia did all the work. They did the development. They did the building, manufacturing, shipping.
And they probably got a sweetheart deal out of that from Russia for refining something or whatever.
Yeah.
Overall, I think
that's back to the question earlier about like what is the strategy of the states. I think we have to be careful about like worshipping false idols, anthropomorphizing states. We heard these American guys talk about their country, that it's basically like this chaotic situation where anything could happen and no one's really in control. Well, let's wonder if maybe states are like that, right? Maybe strategies and cohesive plans are things that academics put on countries when they study history, because it's too unpleasant and maybe too hard to imagine that the world is just a crazy mess. And there's no such thing as America or Russia. There are individuals, there are families, there are corporations, and they're all pursuing their own agenda. And what we end up studying as historians or spectators is we study this mess of different conflicting agendas. And what we try to do is we try and say, there is this entity. This is our false idol, right? This is this wooden thing. And we're going to anthropomorphize that and say, this is like me. This is an entity that can love me and maybe, give me a loan. and I'm going to follow that, and it's going to follow me, and we're going to be buddies, me in America or me in Australia or wherever. I think maybe that's it's inherently flawed reasoning. If you want to understand how states are going to act, you're probably better off having a look at, like, who do you mean when you say that state? Like, people talk about Russia this, Russia that. Are you talking
Who's in
about
charge?
guys that
Who's
own
in
the
charge of
factories
USA?
that make the missiles? When you talk about America, are you talking about the senators who are supported by Raytheon, or are you talking about Allen and Vaun? Because these are different entities, different families with different agendas. And so I think rather than asking what is the personality or strategy of a nation, it's probably more useful to ask, like, what's likely to happen next and why?
But
what's likely to unfold given all of these different motivations?
You're absolutely
NATO's
right.
Like, what, 34 countries? It's not like everyone hasn't his own plan. I mean, I'm pretty damn sure the Spanish don't care. The French are kind of busy with their own. The Germans would have probably liked it if it just blew over and they could have kept their gas. The Polish are basically, when I'm looking at their shopping spree, pretty panicky. I'm pretty damn sure that every country has its own plan. So saying, what does the long-term strategy of the West look like?
Sebastian,
good luck.
Sorry, but every country in the West is effectively a vassal of the USA.
That's what I wanted to say right now. Okay, if Germany was capable of making its own decisions, why has it not yet declared war on the United States for destroying their gas infrastructure? That's a declaration of war. Throughout the entire Cold War, the entirety of the Cold War, the United States and Russia had one plan that was going to happen within the first 10 minutes of a war. Destroy all the satellites, and destroy all the primary infrastructure. America did that in August. America destroyed strategic infrastructure in August. Why are we not at total war with them right now?
We don't know it was the Americans. It could have been the Welsh.
You're right. Dang it, dude. Dang, you're
Nobody
right.
ever looks at the Welsh.
The Welsh. Always the Welsh.
Dude, the Luxembourgians, man.
Yeah, those damn.
Oh, they are seemingly, as far as I heard recently, that the Russians have apparently foiled yet another attack of the Turk Stream pipeline.
These are declarations of world war, and no one's doing anything about it. So to say that Germany has any sort of autonomy in reacting to this is from that specific scenario alone is like, what do you mean? Where is your autonomy? Do something then.
Well, it seems like this thing is kind of escalating out of control, but it's not like rushing out of control as one would seem like, you know, when you read the history books, you go, oh, they had one disagreement, boom, war, right? But this is actually going incredibly fast, and there are very little mechanisms for breaking
Trust
it
me,
at all.
nowadays,
No will for negotiation, no nothing really.
Right now, the aliens are
that's
looking
a
at us and
declaration
they're
of war.
saying if the Americans don't work out what a woman is, they're going to end up having a nuclear war, right? Because domino A is going to hit domino B and domino C and so on. That's when we were talking earlier about the food crises that are coming and the breakdowns in global trade. Really, I think maybe all of the smart people in all the governments in the world, their primary concern now is avoiding a nuclear conflict.
Yeah,
that's
that's
probably
one
what
thing
most people are interested in.
I think, I mean, in one way, the chaos of America is bad, but in another way, it's good because I think that's one of our strengths because people that, you know, were our enemies, I guess, or strategic, you know, rivals. The one thing about America is it's always a wild card. We're cowboys. You never know what we're going to do. And then somebody like Trump, he kind of harnessed that energy and kind of, you know, he ruffled feathers, but he did stabilize a lot of areas. You know, look at, in my lifetime, I never thought I'd see an American walk across the DMZ and shake Kim Jong-un's hand. So, you know, my dad was stationed in Korea in the 70s, so that tripped him out to see that because he knows how bad it was. But I think the problem is just the chaos in America right now and who's running America. The uncertainty that brings to the world is the problem right now. There's just so much uncertainty because you don't know what.
I asked you that because I asked Alan earlier. I asked Alan earlier this question before you logged in, because the United States seems to have a lot of internal strains and issues, like with homelessness. Like there's a lot of things that are going bad. Like if you saw with a few billions here and there, but then there are vast amounts of money going to Ukraine, for example, and whatever. And so, like, from your end, like, because I'm not sure, I don't think you and Vaun, you and Alan live at the same place necessarily. Like, the United States is quite big, I know. So, like, from where you're living, for example, does it seem like people are kind of like, God damn it, look at all the problems we have around us. Why is so much money being sent to Ukraine? Why are we supposed to even care or something like that? Like, are you seeing like the U.S. might be losing its political will or sufficient popular support to persecute the war further, or like the support for Ukraine which is necessary for Ukraine to continue the war?
I think there's a tide that's turning towards not supporting Ukraine and getting out of these wars, but you know, you got people at the top. It's just an ongoing battle. You got a lot. The tide's probably turning, but then you got the guys at the top that are going to resist that no matter what because they obviously have their own agenda and goals and stuff. But like here in Kentucky, we're a red state, but I live in a blue city in a blue county. But for the most part, I can enjoy the United States as it was maybe 50 years ago as far as the rights I have and how they're enforced and what I'm allowed to do. But I still have to deal with the bullshit of having Democrats run my city. So we have homeless problems and stuff like that. The tide's turning, but a lot of it is you just got to get people the information, you know, like, you know, with war crimes or what's going on or, you know, how much money's being wasted, the stories about the weapons being sold and stolen and stuff, you know, the Nazi aspects to some of the government over there, you know, I mean, but over here in the States, you know, they do everything they can to suppress that information. And I mean, people that come out and talk about the war in Ukraine and, you know, what led up to it and some of the issues that have built up the whole problem, you know, oh, you're a Putin apologist or you're a Russian sympathizer. It's like, that's the problem. There's so much uncertainty here. It's so tribal.
I find that fascinating and sometimes wondered if it is because, you know, people tend to kind of at some point just normalizing it as it should be like that, because you cannot actually suppress the information of homelessness when you're actually seeing a bunch of homeless people everywhere, right? Like in you know, the dirty roads, like whatever. Things that you see the problems, right? So you can't suppress that.
That's actually the point I was trying to make when you asked me, right? I can only speak for the people like me, people in my generation, right? Vaun, I don't know, maybe you're what, 23, 24, right?
No, I'm a Gen Xer. Here, I'll give you a quick thing. Like, I'm a Gen Xer. When I went to private school in the 80s, at Catholic private school, they used to line us up and they would say, when the Russians invade, the Soviets invade, they're going to make you deny Christ, line you up and ask you, do you deny Christ or do you accept Christ? And if you accepted Christ, if you say you believe in Jesus, they execute you. So I've gone from that perspective growing up as a kid, like this is what the Soviets are going to be like, to the Cold War ended. We won, air quotes. Why didn't we take that piece and do something positive in Europe and the world? But we didn't, obviously, because we got a bunch of assholes running the West and people that want to make money. But I mean,
and
there's just a lot of stuff going on here. It's just very here. It's just very tribal, and the tribes go back and forth, and the tribes have power. And in some places they're stronger, other places they're weaker. And so, like I said, there's just a lot of uncertainty. I can't really tell you what's going to happen. I mean, there's a lot of calls to defund Ukraine and cut that shit. But
no, that's from your generation.
How many of them are going to do it when the time comes? They talk
that's
now.
From you guys. We have my generation. We like TikTok, Starbucks, and Instagram. So we don't care.
And
but I'm just saying, you guys have
Alan. I mean, isn't it a little bit contingent on your economic situation? Like maybe perhaps where you're living, it's a relatively affluent neighborhood compared to quite a lot of other places in the U.S. Oh yeah, okay. So because it sounds like teenagers or young people would have like if you're in a poor area, you don't usually have a lot of disposable money to kind of just like Starbucks and so forth. At least that would be my impression. But then again, Americans never cease to amaze me in their ability to consume beyond their means.
So, let's put it this way. My generation, all right, has the highest rates of depression, anxiety, and obesity of any generation, proportionally, not by sheer numbers, but by percentage wise, of any generation in U.S. history. And yet we are the lowest earning and the lowest working generation in U.S. history. So to say it depends where you live, it depends how you live, how you use your. Yes, by a per person basis, you're absolutely correct. It might depend on a lot of factors. But if you're going to look at the cultural air of one idea as what people want, a lot of kids my age were just like, I'm probably not going to have kids. I'm going to die by 35, and I'm just going to hang out and do whatever I want because it doesn't matter.
Right. So civil actions is not a prevalent thing.
So if I want to chime in that, if you look at the current generation, the one Alan is talking about, it's living on debt. So the reason it's possible is you have $4. Starbucks is all around you. And all the other companies. It's because I'm currently in the US right now. I can tell you, it's culturally an extreme shock for me the way things operate, because it's so easy to spend money and yet it's so hard to earn it if you actually go into the higher income bracket. It's incredibly easy. The credit card companies, 10 of them will come at you and make you spend everything, and everything. It's just $0.98. If you convert that into Russian rubles or Indian rupees, then you would understand what it means. But for the American dollar, it's a ridiculously low amount of money, but it's not. So the fact is that a lot of university students, they spend much more. And if you look at, so I'm a researcher. What we often try to do is look at behavioral interventions to solve problems. And the behavioral interventions are often, how do you not make a person use their credit card that much? Or how do they understand that we can only spend the next $50 and then we are completely broke and we can't afford milk? And so how do you stop that?
So you said you're in the United States right now, right? You're working here at a university, is that right?
I'm a PhD student.
Oh, okay, awesome. So that means you see exactly how most of the students are living and how they're acting and how they feel about everything. I'm the child of Russian immigrants, right? I grew up in Russian culture in the United States. So I kind of grew up in kind of both sides of that. And I have to come home, live in this Russian culture, and I have to go to class, and I got to see how everyone else lives. and that's the I guess that's the only thing I can say where the place I speak from authority that American culture is deeply hurting.
100% agree.
Yeah.
It's really sad for me. I really look up to America. I like Americans, and I don't like to see that.
Look, I've got this best friend. I've been friends with her since we were like 2-3 years old. We were on this similar path in life. She goes to college, lives on her own now, and she just posts on Instagram about drugs, alcohol, and boys at least twice a week. And all of her friends and all the people she knows and half the people I know. And it's like, guys, I get it. You want to have fun in college, but it's like there's more to life than hedonism. And it's just so deeply encompassing around us.
Have you guys ever heard the Russians saying that the Americans didn't win the Cold War? The Russians lost it first, and the Americans are going to lose it second.
That's what my mom says a lot. That's what my mom says a lot.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to go by the economy-wise, then that makes total sense because we just strung ours along a little bit longer than they did. But we're basically doing the same thing, building and exporting one thing, weapons.
Yep. Vaun, you might be able to speak on this, but my parents say this a lot. And they say that because they immigrated here in 95, 96, the country they moved to is not the same one it is today. Maybe 3 times over.
Oh,
you know why? Do you know why? Because
it's just
okay.
We got rid of all our traditional values, and that's the problem here. Like, if I was to say, I wish it was like it was in the 50s or 60s with people, the first thing people will say is, "Oh, you want separate counters and lunch." It's like, I didn't say that part. I'm talking about the attitude, the culture, the tradition. Like, dad goes to work, mom is able to stay home and raise the kids. The kids go to school. They actually learn shit in school, not the garbage that our kids are taught now. When they get out of high school in the 50s or 60s, they probably are, educated to the level of probably a first or second year college student now, as far as if you want to take the basics. And it's like, you can't talk about the good things in the past or the bad. It's like, if you bring up the past, everything's bad. It doesn't matter if there was a good thing here. Like Christopher Columbus was horrible, I guess, whatever.
But we changed the name. We changed the name of the holiday. We got to change. We got to add a whole holiday for Black Lives Matter, and we got to add a month for the LGBT stuff. And I mean, for YouTube, I'm indifferent. I don't care. But that has an effect. That has an effect on a lot of people and the way people live their lives.
I love it how the U.S. government tries to use that as a kind of like, oh, look, we have people of color and people of that are transgender in the army, and look, so now when we go bomb the living shit out of people, it's at least going to be from an LGBTQ or intolerant bomb that is landing on your head.
I've seen those.
Yeah, I mean,
a bit morbid, I know, but it's like it's kind of true.
No,
like
because morbid. No one here knows what morbid means. No one here knows what dark or suffer or struggle means. We can talk about the lowest income levels and lowest classes of United States citizens, right, who make very little and still suffer a lot. They don't know what suffering is, right? They don't know what war is. I could make $5,000 a year. I could sign up for 7 programs for my state and another 4 from the federal government that give me $62,000 a year, and I won't have to work a day for it. That's not struggle.
I agree, actually. Have a great stream, you guys, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.
See you, man. Take it easy.
You too.
So the thing is that it's all about competition.
Wyatt, you're muted.
Wyatt, you're muted.
Sorry, I just want to say we have gone on for how long was this? Yeah, so we will go on for another maybe 12-15 minutes. Then we end. If not, this will go on forever.
Yeah,
I love talking to you guys. You guys
it's a great timing to have it on the sun.
Yeah, I always like the chatting.
Please carry on. Please carry on.
So I was saying that it's all about competition, and since the 1990, the US is dominant. It was the unipolar power. So because there was no competition, the society became not corrupted exactly, but you understand what I'm trying to point out. So, like in nature, everything has to be balanced, and nature tries to bring the balance in this world. That U.S. is dominant. Why? Because of the dollar. The dollar as a global currency is an anomaly, and US enjoys this anomaly. The people in US enjoy this anomaly. So when we see the conflict between Russia and US, from the American perspective, I think that they are trying to maintain this anomaly of being
they are.
the
They're
best,
totally trying to do
of
that.
having the dollar. Do you understand? Like the dollar is the printing machine. They
Thanks,
print
Nixon.
money,
Thanks,
and
Nixon.
and the people will buy, and if they buy, people will buy. I mean, like the countries rely on the dollar as a standard currency. This demand will not create the objective inflation that any other currency will create. If you print 10% of your whole money, you will have 10% inflation. But it's not like that with the dollar. That's why they
It's
print,
true.
they print, they print, they print.
It's true because they have a lot of the other currencies tied up to the dollar, so they can, in various ways, kind of shift it over so that the negative externalities are kind of hit on, for example, countries like Ghana or whatever that are tied very heavily to the. Oh, someone left.
No, we're just saying hi
Oh,
to
it's about this
Ruslan.
one.
Oh, I was just saying hi.
Hi. Sorry. But it's true, like what you're saying, that the dollar is quite shielded because it is the main reserve currency, and so like inflation doesn't pan out in the same way. But this, now that this bifurcation, as some would call it, with the between the West and those who are willing to cooperate with Russia, going again with the petro ruble, petro yuan, they are starting their own pipeline. So these are economic changes that have a momentum that will not go away, like whether the war ends today or not. And this provides an alternative for quite a lot of other countries.
You are actually answering the Russian objectives that I was going to tell, and this is the Russian objective: multipolarity.
Yeah, as far as I've
multipolar
understood.
Economy and multipolar geopolitics in general. And how can they achieve the second? Not by reducing the US military capabilities. They can do this by increasing the military capabilities of other countries. It's in the interest of the Russians to have a stronger
Are you referring
UK,
to, for example, the Wagner
Spain,
group being
Italy.
in the Sahel? Are you referring to Are you referring to, for example, the Wagner group being in the Sahel, taking over for France in Burkina Faso, for example, or because France and the US has been generally with Africa and so forth been very heavily entrenched with a lot of military down there. The Russians have lately been like an increasing presence both in those countries as well.
Okay, can I jump in just quickly?
Oh, yeah, sure,
I'm new
please.
here. So the thing about the Russians, what they learned is from the 90s is if you have to counter United States and other countries, you need to use asymmetric warfare. So if they are building aircrafts, you're building anti-aircrafts. If they're building something else, you're building the opposite. The Wagner Group, and before the Wagner Group, there were other Russian special operation forces. The K4, the K4 are the ones that are operating in Syria. The K4 are the ones that are operating in Syria. The K4 are the ones that are operating in Syria. The K4 are the ones that are operating in Syria. The K4 are the ones that are operating in Syria. The K4 are the ones that are operating in Syria. The K4 are the ones that are operating in Syria. The K4 are the ones that are operating in Syria. The K4 are the ones that are operating in Syria. The K4 are the ones that are operating in Syria. The K4 are the ones that are operating in Syria. The K4 are the ones that are operating in Syria. The K4 are the ones that are operating in Syria. The K4 are the ones that are operating in Syria. The K4 are the ones that are operating in Syria. The K4 are the ones that are operating in Syria. The K4 are the ones that are operating in Syria. The K4 are the ones that are operating in Syria. The K4 are the ones that are operating in Syria. The K4 are the ones that are operating in Syria. The K4 and before that there were S4 and other. So in the 90s, the Russians pivoted somehow from combating conventional war into local warfare and dealing with local conflicts. That's why they have so many of these is it organizations or so many units specialized for dealing with them. So when it comes to dealing with I lost the trail of thought. What was the question?
I don't think there was a question, right? Was there a question?
No, I
Can
think
I ask you something about, like, do you think one reason the groups like the Wagner Group and stuff and the Russians are able to go into Africa with so much, and gain influences, because, I mean, I know some of it's because they're not a colonial power, but is it because they're basically, like you said, going in and helping these countries or governments with a local problem? And sure, they probably get some kind of deal out of that, but then they basically leave. It's like, we come in, we take care of your problem like exterminators.
I've understood it that many down there, there are several accusations against France and the US that, or be this true or not, I cannot verify, I don't know. But as far as some of the popular sentiment down there seems to be that they claim that they're doing the same as in the Congo. They're kind of arming the same groups that they're so close to defeating. So they're never going to solve it at all. But wherever the Wagner Group is involved, they seem to be kind of just, here's the job done.
No,
And
but according to the Western narrative, the Wagner Group eats babies, kills everyone, and takes no prisoners. So,
sure. So, but that may be also perhaps the reason why they are so successful. That some dictator in Burkina Faso would say, like, yeah, sure, I think I'll take the Russians since they might get the job done. Hello.
Yeah, so can I jump in one more time? When it comes to I'm actually in Tanzania right now, right next to Mountain Kilimanjaro, and I have experience with through family experience with these local conflicts. You can say local conflicts. So I can say that in Congo right now, most of us are actually focusing on Ukraine, but in Congo there's also an ongoing conflict going there. But it's the same people feeding weapons and the same people trying to fight off the. So at the end of the day, it's just everyone is on the same bed. Someone is supplying weapons, another one is talking. Yeah, but
are
at
you
the end
implying
of the day,
that America is doing something bad? You can't do that. That would be bad. No, I'm kidding.
Of course. War is profit. War is profit. Where you have war, you make profit. But let me give you another example. I'm a little bit deviating from Ukraine right now.
That's fine.
Going to Rwanda.
Maybe.
We haven't even talked about Ukraine for like 3 hours.
Yeah, we have. Yeah, we did. No. That's not
in
fair.
the first
20,
hour.
20 minutes ago. 20 minutes ago, we were talking about it.
So let's talk about Rwanda, Rwanda-Burundi genocide. There was no UN going in there. Nothing. It's just the genocide happened, and it's like everyone forgot about it. In Sierra Leone, they tried to do about it, but in Congo, DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, you have I think, M23 rebels who are, I think I'm going on record right now, who are funded by Rwanda. They go there, they go and take the minerals. one of the most important mineral is the coltan and others, apart from diamond and everything else. And it's the same minerals that goes up and creates iPhones or any kinds of phones. So you find Congo, DRC, very big country in the middle of Africa, still very poor. It has all the resources, it has everything. And they had the biggest UN mission called MONUC or MONUSCO in French. They were there. There were 30,000 UN troops or more, bigger than in Lebanon when there was conflict between Palestine and others. And we know that UN troops, even in Palestine and Israel, they were attacked. Here they were in Congo, MONUSCO, and it was the largest mission, 30,000, maybe more. And you can't imagine how much resources were extracted during that time. And I'm trying to tie it into Ukraine, this whole narrative. If you think about Ukraine, you can divide it in half along the Dnieper River. Why did the Russians withdraw from the Kherson? They went there because if you look at the history, when the Polish, when the Lithuanians came and fought on Ukraine, they always met at the Dnieper River. What is on the east? It is the industrialized side. What is on the west? I don't know. So the whole conflict, it's either about resources, it's either about history. You make it yourself. So that's it. That's what I had to share.
Any comments?
Well, I think it's true that war is a business, and the question we have to ask ourselves is: does war create poverty, or does poverty create war? Or put another way, does war ruin countries, or do countries that are ruined by debt slide into war because being a soldier becomes the best job you can get?
It doesn't have to be one or the other. It can be both at the same time. That's order and chaos,
I'm
right?
inclined to think that debt is the father of war. Because the thing about billionaires is they just want to watch Netflix and buy a new Porsche. And a lot of people don't know this about billionaires, right? But billionaires are in debt. Everyone's in debt. Yep. Everybody. This is hard for a lot of people to grasp, but the richest people in the world have got the most leverage, and so they're in the most debt. And so when you get a social system that is overblown with debt, the billionaires get desperate.
That's
and
for
when
the time
billionaires
being.
get desperate, you get war.
Well, one of the reasons, as far as I've understood, is that the billionaires have debt is because they get actually tax exemptions and so forth. So that's one of the reasons they deliberately go into debt, because their debt agreement they can negotiate to be cheaper than it would be to otherwise pay taxes.
Billionaires go into debt for the same reason you and I go into debt, right? They're trying to make money. They're trying to increase their position. A lot of billionaires, they can't actually access their family's money because
right. But their strategy. They possess the means to do this in the long run, and so since they can take this like, okay, what will happen every year? How can we cut these expenses and just keep it going? Like, this is just how I've understood it. Why they will go into debt, because quite a lot of them don't actually need to. It's just like easier to go into debt, and they're like,
I'll chime in on this. What happens is, if you get large enough, you can use the resources of the taxpayer, which is the larger population, to subsidize you instead of using your own family money, because that's costlier. It's cheaper to draw on public money, because on public money, if something happens, your venture fails, You can take a haircut. You can say, I can't return all of it. You can go into bankruptcy. You can lose it. Let's say you had no debt. You were completely based on your own resources. Your venture goes under. You lose everything of your own. But if you're on debt, it's somebody else who partly at least takes that blame. And that's why as a billionaire, you would always go into leverage. You would also go into equity. So, but using personal funds is actually kept to the minimum by most of the top billionaires. And there's a reason, because they know how to lobby for the interest rates.
Yep.
They can lobby for the haircuts.
There's
When I'm saying haircut, I mean when you do a default as to how much percentage is not paid. So
there's a
all of
famous
this is
saying.
lobbied.
There's a famous saying that goes, when a bank loans you $1 million and you lose it, it's your fault. But when the bank loans you $1 billion and you lose it, then it's the bank's fault. I don't know who made that up, but I just know it.
So,
well, the 2008 was a good example of that, and also the COVID
given
stimulus
the
is also a good
explosion in
example.
fiat currency, is global war inevitable? In other words, if you've got desperate billionaires everywhere and they're trying to prop up failing institutions, they look for a way out. Because war is business, because war is profitable, is that what we resort to when we have too much debt? I mean, collectively, not individually, but collectively. Is war the inevitable fruit of debt and fiat currency?
I think debt is created for war. I think war.
Yeah.
So if you look at the history of the central banking system, that pretty much came in around the First World War. And the First World War, if you had a gold-based system, for example, in which resources are finite, you can't really print too much, they would have come into a discussion maybe after 1 year of war when the front lines weren't moving. But if you can print more money, you can sustain a war for longer. So really, it's much easier to finance a war across different continents with a lot of resources if you can print money and people can believe that that money is real, which is happening right now.
That's a really interesting way to put it. Another way to put it is, if the central banking system didn't take root in the United States as it did in 1913, 1912, I don't remember when Woodrow Wilson passed that law, America would not be as strong as a nation as it is today. But we could also argue that the world wars would not have been as brutal, or might not have even happened as the way they happened. Because if central banking did not take root in most of the Western world, then you'd be looking at a completely different world. We wouldn't be here having this panel. We wouldn't be doing half the things we were doing.
Right. So if
central
we went back
banking
to a
is
hard currency, if the gold standard was reestablished, we'd see a lot of sacred cows die. We'd see a lot of institutions fall
Absolutely.
over. We might even see like monarchies in Western nations fall over, right? But if we could stomach that, if we could watch our wooden idols die, if we could let our institutions go instead of worshipping them and keeping them alive with even more debt, would it bring peace?
Let's put it this way. That would be a heavily traumatic thing for everyone involved, culturally, people, individuals, everything. Let me raise you this.
It'd be better than a nuclear war, right?
Yeah, I agree. But it would affect everything in a good or positive way that happened after that point. And let me raise you this. Rome collapsed as a civilization 1600 years ago, thereabouts, 15-something years ago. We still have it in our minds because of the way that it happened and the way that everything happened from the collapse of Rome still affects us today. If the Germanic peoples didn't go into Rome and colonize Northern Africa and Central Italy, we wouldn't have a westernized world as we have it today. Rome was a very Eastern nation, right?
Well, some people were saying that the Byzantine Empire was the continuation.
I know. I agree with that. But the collapse of Rome, the fall of the Western Roman Empire, right, absolutely still affects us today. Still today. And if we're talking about some sort of change in our current system, we have to also think
because they debased their currency.
But that's something funny. Would you think it could be somewhat analogous to like the United Kingdoms? You know, they were kind of like considered that as the western part of the Roman Empire, analogous to that. They were beaten so hard by the Germanics yet again that they lost their seat of power, and now they're a junior partner of the US. I know it's a ridiculous analogy or something, but it's kind of like
I would have to look into that more for that analogy to make sense, because I'm not super well read on that section of history. But
yeah,
my
got
point being,
it.
my central point being is we have to be careful what we wish for. If what we want is some sort of change or even a slight shift in what we do or how we're living our lives, that's going not to affect our kids, not our grandkids, not our great grandkids. It's going to affect 15 generations down the line.
Well, there are quite a lot of radical changes globally that's been occurring just the past 2-3 years. I mean, it seems to be kind of more like routine to make it happen. Vaun?
Yeah, I was just going to say that, I mean, I think like he was saying, be careful what you wish for. I mean, like in the West, particularly the United States, I mean, we have a lot way farther to fall. And like I said, people are so comfortable and used to the lifestyle and the standard of living. Any major changes are going to be catastrophic in people's minds. I mean, like I said, some people will deal with it. Some people will adapt to it. Other people will not. And, I think that's one thing is like, we have farther to fall, but any fall is going to be very noticeable to people that are pretty content and complacent, and it won't be a good way. Whereas people that are more aware of what's going on are like, here it comes, let's get ready. Where a lot of people are just going to be shocked. And every time some little change happens, it's going to be very jolting and jarring. Whereas a lot of the other world changes happen all the time and it's no big deal, like swap this guy out for that guy. And I'm not trying to put other countries down. I'm just saying for us, I think it would be a lot more jarring as each step down came, just because people are so complacent here and lazy and used to. I mean, we're a service country.
Well, what you're saying, would it kind of pertain to a bit like with how Europe is kind of deindustrializing and transporting quite a lot of their companies over to the US? That the US can actually just basically externalize all those hits that are occurring like against the system, because it's sort of like an economic empire, right? Not a territorial empire. And so it can not necessarily dictate, but it can so heavily influence many of the smaller nations, be it a friend or a foe, that it can kind of offset quite a lot of the knock on the punches, so to speak, in that sense. Like, would you say like this thing with the would be a good example of to what you were talking about, like shifting the industry from Germany?
Look what's going to happen to Europe, with the energy crisis. I mean, we're insulated from that. We're still going to take a hit. How bad is the hit going to be? I mean, like I said, the uncertainty is who's running our country right now. I mean, we don't have competent people that are able to make adult decisions, no matter how hard they are, that may be beneficial to our country or not. Sometimes maybe you have to compromise. We just don't. So I think that's the biggest problem. I mean, there's a lot of things that could go good, but there's just as many things that can go wrong and I think that's the problem. The whole world sees it and is like, what the fuck? What are these guys doing? What are we going to do? I mean, I'm not saying we're out of control and chaotic. In some ways we are, but we're just creating an instability by us being, because this shit gets out. I mean, you go on Telegram.
Do you see this as kind of slowing down, stabilizing, and maybe even improving in some way, or do you see this as a one-way train, eventually having to hit a cliff or something?
I think it can only correct for that.
The thing is every election cycle, it's like we go forward, we go back, we go forward. So I think at some point it's either going to break to where we stop going off the cliff, or it's finally going to break.
It can only correct if there's a correction. So if you look at the stock market, when do you know that it can actually go up? When there's a precipitous fall, and then there's nobody who's willing to sell at that rate because it's already so low, and then you have a correction. Now 2008, one of the main problems was it wasn't allowed to correct in a classical sense. Instead, the government came and bailed everything out, and so that really led to an expanding liquidity. So the thing is that we need a real correction for people to really understand what the hell is going around, because the Asians know it. I mean, I come from a military background, my family. We know how bad war is and what people feel on the front line and what troops face. The people who do not have any people in the military, they don't really understand what a soldier goes through on the front lines and what the sort of risks are as they take. The entire problem is that the people in the United States, but it's not just the United States, a lot of people, even in India, they're so insulated from the misery of a lot of people who are poor or who are in the trenches fighting. They just don't understand what suffering really is. And so suffering would actually have to hit people where they are for people to really come to their senses. Till that happens, if we meander and sort of kick the can down the road, then it's going to take another 5 to 10 years. But eventually, it is going to only get corrected when everything, the shit really hits the fan, so to speak.
Sounds like World War One or World War Two.
You got like
a global planning civil war or something going on or something. That's what it sounded like.
I just need
It's going to be run down to shit. Everyone is going to be really poor, and then it's going to be like a massive slugfest going on all over the world.
Don't say that. I mean,
So can I go next? Can I go next?
Oh, sure, please.
DPA Asia, thank you very much for your time. I think this is the time we have to wrap it up. When it comes to Ukraine, this is food for thought. When it comes to Ukraine, think about the Dnieper River. That is the one that's going to divide. There's going to be some simple, small variations, but the Dnieper River is going to divide everything. That's my final contribution.
Yeah. So I was about to actually say that everyone can have your last words. So Ruslan has already started. So who shall be next?
I'm gonna go like Toby and then just work our way across.
All right, we'll go around just all I say is thanks, guys. A very interesting conversation. Better than I thought it would be. I'm very cynical. But thanks, guys. And thank you, Vhen.
It's very addictive. You will come back again, I'm sure.
I love doing this so much.
I always enjoy these sessions. It's so much enjoyment.
There's not much profanity here for an Australian, but it's okay.
So EmLill Things, do you want to have?
Yeah, sure. I'm just going to throw in a prediction because we always know these are going to be right. And so since I said it, I'm gonna just assume it's correct, and so that's why everyone here is going to take as fact. And that is that I'm kind of like baffled in between two things, and that is if whether or not Russia would actually conduct any offensive whatsoever and just let things grind slowly, or if they would go for Odessa. I think they will go for Odessa. They will retake all the things politically that are annexed, and if so, if they see they can do it, they will try to aim for Odessa, and because that will kind of be the checkmate for Ukraine, anyways. If they would be kind of sluggishly ending the war. Okay, that was kind of, and that's true. Now that you all know that, so thank you for
Captain Georgios.
Yes. So I think that sooner or later, Russia will use the conscripts to fill up the gaps. They will make a good encirclement. The winter will be very bad, and in the end, we will have a settlement. That's what I think. Or if the war continues, it will continue in favor of Russia. I don't think that the US will put everything on that. I think they will also need a good excuse to get out of this war, because for them it's also a new Vietnam when it comes to the cost. I think that's the rational evolution of what's going to happen. But I would also like to point out that these horrible things that we see is because of ineffective diplomacy. If we take a look of Europe in the 19th century, there was a good status quo, a multipolar world, or at least there was a good balance between the European powers, and there was relatively peace, something that we are currently missing. I hope we will go back to this kind of situation. 19th century diplomacy.
Ruslan, do you want to repeat again? Do you want to say anything, Ruslan? Give you one more chance to close.
Myself, yeah. I think at the end of the day, I'm quoting, I'm watching Doctor Who, and I quoted Doctor Who. I don't know if it was the 12th or 13th. You have to sit back and talk. That's a thing. All conflicts can be prevented by going, sit back and talk.
Vaun?
That's for me.
Okay, I was just going to say, I enjoy the live chats all the time. Always love the panels. Always like hearing what everybody's got to say. I got to go watch the first 2 hours. My only thing on the winter is I do think the Russians will do an offensive, but I think given the amount of equipment and troops that they're bringing online, I see them probably forming battle groups, moving them around all over the borders of Ukraine, north, south, east, and west. And then when they find a spot after they've run their Ukrainians ragged, they'll just punch through somewhere when it's frozen.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll see what happens after that. But, I mean, it'll be negotiated. It's just a matter of how much territory is going to be under their control when they negotiate. But I had a good time. Thanks, Wyatt.
Thanks, Vaun. So,
Thank
Alan?
you.
Yeah, so first things again, kind of like everyone else was just saying, like I love these chats. I'm totally honored that I can even be part of these things. You guys are way smarter than I could even imagine to be. I just hope I can learn something from you guys. But if we're going to talk about what I think is coming, I like looking at patterns. And what's the pattern in this war, as childish and surface level as this is? Russia always does something either on the 10th of a month or the 24th of a month. And my personal little prediction, kind of like EmLill said, he has his own prediction that has to come true. My little one is either things go crazy in December 10th or December 24th. And if Russia decides to do kind of what Vaun did, search around, push the buttons and keep hamstringing Ukraine along, that's probably what they'll do. And since the Russians are so pattern drawn, they're gonna act on one of those. I'm not going to pretend like I know how this conflict's going to end. I'm not going to pretend like I know where the world is going, but I can hope that we're all going to a better place ultimately on the long run. And let's see. Everyone pray, and hope for the best.
Sorry.
Me?
Yeah.
So I would say I think the Russians are training a lot. So the reason they're training a lot is probably because they are focused on a particular offensive or a multi-pronged offensive. And if I were in the Russian shoes, I would negotiate from a position of strength. So right now their position is not as strong. They've lost Kherson, they've lost Kharkov. So maybe Kharkov and Odessa would be difficult at this point of time, but they might be eventual. It really depends on how much blood the Russians lose in the next few months of war. Because if they do lose a lot, they might want to just occupy as much Ukrainian territory as possible, including Odessa and Kharkov. Otherwise, I would say their objectives would be all of the land of the provinces which they've already declared. So in Zaporozhye, for example, there are plenty of mineral resources which could be occupied strategically, because that would give a lot of leverage over Ukraine in the future. So they would try to occupy every bit of Ukrainian territory which has any significant natural resources first, and then negotiate, for which they would have to take a lot more ground than they currently have. So I think they're probably preparing for a big winter offensive. If it's sometime in the winter, they would have to strike, because otherwise they would also face a lot of opposition at home for not doing anything. As the media on the West is clearly saying Russia is losing the war. So they have to change that narrative first and then negotiate and then show to their own people that, because even if I read Russia today, RT doesn't have articles which is, they're still saying that we withdrew from Kherson, but we are going to come back. So they are not saying we are winning the war. So they at least have to show some narrative to the Russian public to be able to sign a peace treaty.
Good point. So thank you everyone for participating. It's a brilliant session. It's a
Sundays
good week,
are
right?
good timing.
It's been 1
Sundays
month,
are
right?
good. So I was just saying that Sunday is a very good time to have these live streams.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was my
Sundays,
first live discussion
So
on YouTube, at least.
Yeah, it's great.
thank you so much, everyone, for attending. So so we have to close. If not,
Thank
then
you very
next week,
much,
one
DPA.
Thank you, Ruslan.
Thank you, DPA.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye, Vaun. Bye,
Bye.
Georgios. Bye, Vhen. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Ruslan.
Bye.
So that's all, guys, girls, gentlemen, and ladies. This is the open mic. This is episode 7. So for those that are interested in the previous episodes that we have done, please subscribe to DPA IRL. So youtube.com/DPAIRL. Go over, subscribe, support the channel. I'm getting people to help me to snip up all these very long conversation into small clips, so that some interesting conversations can be rewatched. So it makes it more digestible for people who can't stand 3-hour, almost 4-hour long conversations. And I know it has been a long wait for this open mic. I think it's been 1 month since the last one. So I'm so sorry because I was so busy. And and World Cup does not help. So but who cares about Canada and Croatia, right? So so we can do this session. So Spain is Germany and is playing. But I can't watch. I need to wake up early. So anyway, thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. I hope you like it. I think the DPA community is one of the smartest and most brilliant geopolitical group of people or intellectuals that YouTube has to offer. I think the DPA open mic is way more interesting than many of the talk shows that I've watched. And I don't even watch many of the talk shows anymore, because DPA community just give so much more than some of the YouTube channels and talk shows out there. So I'm glad you guys like it. Do share to your friends and families, or contacts that might like this kind of thing. Help to grow this community. Lately, DPA is not growing that much. So help to grow. We can't even hit that 50,000 mark because it's like, God, so difficult. Yeah. So anyway, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next update. And there's no outro, so because this is not my OBS studio, so bye bye.